Hey guys, tonight we're dragging you gently into the past to a place so atmospheric you can almost smell it. Because tonight we're heading into the soot-smudged, soap-deprived world of Victorian hygiene. You know the aesthetic, foggy cobblestone alleys, top hats, horse manure. But what you probably don't know is how many people went to bed and out to dinner, with weeks-old sweat, lice nests under their wigs, and a haunting disregard for toothpaste. You're about to become very aware of your own soap shelf. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your city and what time you're listening to this. Are we talking midnight in Milwaukee? Or 2 AM in Madrid? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey up together. You step into London, somewhere between 1840 and 1850. The first thing that hits you? Smell. It's not one thing, it's layers. A base note of rotting vegetable matter, a sharp punch of horse dung, smoke from coal fires, and just the faintest trace of someone trying to mask it all with lavender cologne that only seems to make it worse. The air isn't just heavy, it clings to your clothes. You haven't even walked 10 steps, and you're already starting to feel a thin coating of grime settle into your skin folds. Welcome to the capital of the British Empire. Now here's the thing. For all its reputation for elegance, corsets, carriages, and carefully enunciated vowels, Victorian London is deeply filthy. Not because people liked being dirty, but because the infrastructure to support cleanliness simply didn't exist for most of the population. The sewers, where they existed, overflowed constantly. Streets were rarely cleaned, and houses were crammed so close together you could borrow a spoon through your neighbour's window. You know how we say, don't forget to wash your hands? Yeah, Victorians said that too, but unironically, because people actually forgot. There's a saying floating around during this time. Cleanliness is next to godliness. But what they don't tell you is that being clean had more to do with moral character than actually, washing your armpits. You might be spiritually scrubbed, but physically, you're wearing 3 layers of wool, you haven't bathed in a week, and you still think germs are a French rumour. The divide is massive. If you're wealthy, you might have indoor plumbing, kind of. You've got a copper tub that takes hours to fill with water you pay to have heated over a coal stove. But if you're poor, and the majority are, you're living in a room smaller than your modern bathroom, shared with 6 other people and maybe a goat, using a chamber pot that sloshes with every movement and gets dumped, casually, into the alleyway at dawn. This early Victorian city isn't just dirty, it's perilously dirty. People die from their own filth. Typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis, all thriving. In fact, this isn't just an aesthetic problem, it's a survival one, which makes it deeply ironic that hygiene is still somehow seen as optional, or at least seasonal. And yes, people did notice. You've got reformers, public health advocates, and even a few doctors who are just starting to whisper about something called germ theory. But for now, those voices are quiet, and the louder opinion is still, if I can't see it, it's not a problem. Meanwhile, in your temporary 19th century body, you're trying not to breathe through your nose. You shuffle past coalmen, chimney sweeps, and vendors shouting about eels. Because yes, eels were popular street food, and every step brings a new waft of humanity. One man is scratching his scalp so vigorously you suspect he's going to hit bone. A woman sells flowers from a basket that's clearly been dunked in something other than water. Children run barefoot over horse droppings, having the time of their lives. And then there's you, in your wool trousers or many petticoated skirt, sweating under the autumn sun, no deodorant, no shower, no hope. You might think, okay, I'll just freshen up when I get home. But your home is a room with no running water, a tiny fireplace that barely lights, and a bucket outside you share with the family upstairs. By the time you haul in a small pitcher of cold, sooty water and splash it on your face, it's already grey again. Let's talk trash for a second. Modern cities have garbage trucks and designated pickup days. Victorians have rats and something called the dustman, a guy who comes around irregularly to collect your waste if you can pay him. Most don't, so garbage piles up. Food scraps, dead animals, broken pottery, soiled cloth. This is where the idea of the mudlark comes in. Young kids who root around the Thames for anything salvageable. You pass one. He's covered in something that might have once been mud but now smells like sulphur and despair. He smiles. 3 teeth, maybe. And here's the fringe fact you didn't want. People genuinely believe that bad smells cause disease, not the bacteria inside the waste, but the smell itself. This is the now debunked miasma theory, and it's why so many Victorians put so much faith in perfume, potpourri, and sticking herbs up their noses, like it's an Elizabethan rave. There's some scholarly debate over just how bad things really were, by the way. Some historians argue we exaggerate the filth, leaning too hard into shock value. Others say we underplay it, romanticising corsets and tea while ignoring that women gave birth in rooms next to overflowing chamber pots. The truth is probably somewhere in between, an empire of contrast where opulence and sewage lived shoulder to shoulder. But for now, the sun sets over the Thames. The fog rolls in, not the moody cinematic kind, but the acrid coal dust and dung kind that makes your eyes sting. You pull your coat tighter, though it barely helps, and make your way through streets where the ground crunches underfoot, not from leaves, but from crushed oyster shells, soot, and maybe a broken comb. You've survived your first Victorian evening. Sort of. You'll need a bath. Eventually. Probably next week. But don't get too excited about it, because that bath has its own terrifying story coming up next. You wake up the next morning in your Victorian bed, which, to be clear, is more like a damp wooden crate lined with burlap and sadness. The straw mattress it rests on crackles beneath you when you shift. Something's definitely alive in there, but let's just not investigate. You sit up and breathe in through your mouth, because the air smells like boiled cabbage, damp plaster, and someone else's night sweats. Your clothes, which double as your pyjamas, are already on your body, because why change into something clean when clean isn't really an option? You're stiff, a little itchy, and deeply aware of the grime settling into every crease of your skin. So naturally, you think maybe today's a bath day. But hold on. In the 1850s, the idea of bathing regularly, like with full-body submersion in water, is still a weirdly controversial act. Not taboo exactly, but suspicious. In fact, many Victorians, especially those who read a lot of questionable health advice pamphlets, firmly believe that bathing too often can weaken the body or even make you sick. One cold draft across a wet back and boom, instant consumption. For the working class, though, the problem isn't philosophical, it's logistical. Water's not just sitting around in taps waiting for you to turn the handle. You have to fetch it, heat it, and then pour it into a big metal tub, if you even have one. Most don't. You might use a shared wash basin out in the courtyard, or you skip the bath entirely and settle for the daily wipe, which involves a cloth, some lukewarm water, and a lot of wishful thinking. Even in wealthier households, full baths are rare. Once a week is considered plenty. More than that, and people might start to wonder if you're excessive. There's also a weird puritanical thing tied up in all of this. Being too clean implies vanity, or worse, moral weakness. The body, after all, is a vessel of sin. You don't want to polish it too much. So today, you decide to do as most do, you'll wait. Not out of laziness, but because it's simply not the day for a bath. Besides, you tell yourself you had one last... Was it Tuesday or the week before? Hard to say. There was soap involved. Maybe. Still, as the morning fog lifts and the light hits your cracked miseror, you catch a glimpse of yourself and think, something must be done. Your face is shiny, not in the healthy, hydrated way, but in the oily patina of survival way. You splash some water from the jug into a shallow basin and scrub at your cheeks. It helps, barely. Then you pick up your wash rag, which is, let's be honest, a rag in name only. It smells like mildew and last month's soap. You wipe down your armpits and under your neck. One layer of filth moved slightly to the left. Now comes the ritual of what Victorians called the sponge bath, which sounds gentle and spa-like, but is really more like dampening yourself with chilly water while pretending you're not freezing. You take care to avoid getting your hair wet. Wet hair takes forever to dry, and again, cold scalp equals death, apparently. Instead, you pat down the areas most likely to betray you with smell. Pits, feet, behind the knees, and if you're feeling wild, the small of your back. Soap is optional. It's expensive, especially the good stuff. The cheap kind, made from animal fat and lye, and smells like a barn had a nervous breakdown. And even if you do have it, using too much might be seen as wasteful. You use a sliver today, rubbing it into a greyish foam that never quite bubbles, then rinse it off with about 2 tablespoons of water. Victory! Let's not forget the towel situation. You get one, it is small, it is rough, it has never been fully dry since the day you acquired it. You do your best, then shake your hands in the air and accept that you're going to stay at about 74% damp for the next 3 hours. Meanwhile, someone in the next room is drawing their own bath, the full body kind. You hear the scraping sound of coal being shoveled into the stove, the metallic groan of the copper tub being filled one bucket at a time. If you're lucky enough to live in a household that takes turns, you might get the bathwater second, if not, your fifth. And by then, the water is a tepid grey stew of hair, skin cells, and floating regret. This is where things get bleakly communal. Families often share bathwater, oldest to youngest. You, being somewhere in the middle, get the in-between broth. There's a fringe fact here you'll love. Some households believed adding herbs to the bath didn't just mask the smell, it actually cleansed the water spiritually. As if rosemary could cancel out foot grime. It didn't. But hey, at least it made it smell like something vaguely alive. You slip your hand into the water. It's barely warm, already going cold. You climb in with the speed of someone who knows they have 8 minutes before they lose circulation. The tub creaks, the water sloshes. You try to scrub with purpose, but it's mostly just rearranging the grime. There's no faucet to rinse off, just a ladle, and another person standing by with a bucket. Hope you didn't make enemies this week. In fact, water itself is a sketchy thing. Clean water is not guaranteed. The pipe systems are primitive at best, and you don't always know that if your water's coming from a well, a pump, or some gently bubbling death stream downstream of a tannery. Boiling it helps, but that costs fuel, so you bathe in what you have, knowing full well it may not be doing you any favours, and yet you feel better. Not clean exactly, but less like a creature crawling toward death. You step out, wrap yourself in the damp towel, and start the drying process, which takes forever in a house that's colder inside than it is out. There's debate among historians about how often the average Victorian really bathed. Some sources suggest weekly full baths were common in cities by the late 1800s. Others argue that even that was optimistic, especially for the poor. It's possible that the idea of the once-a-week bath is more of a middle-class ideal than a working-class reality. But one thing's for sure, the bath wasn't just an act of hygiene, it was an event, rare, deliberate, and exhausting. You return to your room and dress in your freshly shaken out clothes, not freshly washed, mind you, just aired out near a window. Your socks are crunchy, your shirt still smells faintly of sweat, coal smoke, and the potatoes you carried home 2 days ago. You look at yourself again in the mirror, and you smile, not because you're clean, but because you're clean enough to blend into the rest of the unwashed world. You're out the door by mid-morning, bundled up in your layers of wool and linen, wondering if your armpits are already betraying you. The streets are waking up, and so are the smells. Coal smoke drifts from chimneys, mixing with the sour tang of horses, rotting vegetables, and the faint but persistent odour of human waste. It's not even noon, and London already smells like someone's been slow-cooking a sock stew in the gutters. Still, you march on because today is the day of your weekly wash. Not of yourself, you handled that yesterday sort of, but of your clothes, or at least the ones you can afford to clean. In the Victorian world, laundry is not just a chore, it's a whole thing. It's time-consuming, back-breaking, soul-depleting labour. And the very idea of doing it more than once a week is laughable. For most households, once a month is more realistic depending on the weather, water availability, and whether you can actually afford soap. You've got exactly 2 sets of clothes, maybe 3 if you're lucky, and only one of those is what you call nice. Washing them is less about hygiene and more about keeping them from turning into stiff, odour-trapping sculptures. Today you've been invited, and by that we mean volunteered, to help with wash day at a neighbour's. This is a favour economy after all. Everyone helps everyone, because no one can afford to do it alone. You show up at a small backyard behind a tenement where a group of women is already getting started. There's a cauldron boiling over a coal fire, a wooden tub beside it, a cracked washboard, and a pile of greying clothes that smell like mould and regret. The air is damp and smoky, and every surface seems coated in soot. You roll up your sleeves and plunge your hands into cold water, teeth gritting. One of the women hands you a lump of soap, brownish, waxy, and vaguely meaty. It's homemade, possibly from tallow, possibly from something else. You don't ask. You scrub a shirt against the washboard, using enough force to sand a table. Your fingers go numb within minutes, and your knuckles feel like they've been introduced to a cheese grater. Welcome to Laundry Day. Here's the historical truth of it. For most Victorian households, especially among the working class, washing clothes was considered one of the most punishing tasks imaginable. It required heat, water, space, and a lot of physical effort. The water had to be drawn by hand, carried in heavy buckets, then boiled. The soap had to be grated or melted. Clothes were sorted, soaked, scrubbed, wrung out, boiled again, beaten with paddles, rinsed multiple times, wrung out again, and then finally hung to dry. And that's just for the basics. Delicate items are special stains. Don't even get started. And if you thought doing laundry outside in the sun was quaint, think again. Most people are doing this in cramped backyards or dark basements. In winter, your hands freeze while the clothes take days to dry indoors, often stiffening into boards near the fire. In summer, the damp heat means mildew forms before your shirts even finish drying. There is no winning. There's also a fascinating little fringe ritual known as bluing. Since soap doesn't actually make white clothes look white, more like a dull yellow-grey, Victorians add a bit of blue dye to their rinse water to trick the eye. The blue cancels out the yellow tones, making clothes appear brighter. You try it today and marvel as your shirt, once beige with filth, now looks vaguely cleanish blue. It's an illusion, but a convincing one. Of course, as you're wringing out a pair of socks that could stand up on their own, you begin to notice something else. The smell. Not from the laundry, from everyone around you. Even freshly laundered, most people still carry a background scent of sweat, smoke, and animal fat. It's just normal. Nobody expects you to smell like lilies. Deodorant hasn't been invented yet, and the concept of antiperspirant is still decades away. You smell like hard work, and so does everyone else. It's kind of comforting, actually. Now, here's something weird. There's still a lingering moral judgment about laundry. Clean clothes are seen as a sign of virtue, especially for women. If your family's clothes are dirty, it's assumed you're lazy or immoral, or even if you literally have no money for soap or water. This pressure is crushing, and it's why so many working-class women push themselves to keep up with wash day, even when their hands are raw, their backs ache, and they haven't eaten properly in 2 days. You glance around the yard at the other women, one scrubbing with a fury that suggests she's imagining the shirt is someone she doesn't like. Another wrings out a petticoat with a twist that could snap a grown man's wrist. There's no idle chatter, just the rhythmic slap of wet fabric against stone and the occasional grunt of effort. You feel like you've joined a secret society of sudsy warriors. By late afternoon, the washing is finally done, and the yard is strung with lines of dripping clothing. They sway gently in the wind like damp flags of surrender. Your fingers are wrinkled, your lower back is plotting rebellion, and your arms feel like overcooked noodles. But there's a strange sense of pride in it all. The clothes are cleaner, not spotless, but livable. You've helped extend their life by another week, maybe 2. As you wipe your hands on your apron, someone hands you a cup of weak tea. It's lukewarm, but it might as well be nectar from the gods. You sit on an overturned crate, and take in the scene. Clothes drying, smoke curling up from chimneys, kids chasing a hoop through the street, someone shouting about potatoes. It's not glamorous, but it's real. There's a scholarly debate here too. Some historians argue that Victorian people were obsessed with cleanliness, citing all the soap ads, hygiene manuals, and household advice columns that popped up during the period. Others say that's just aspirational, that most people couldn't afford to be clean even if they wanted to, and the literature was more about shaming them than helping. The truth? Probably both. Victorian society loved to set impossible standards and then judge you for failing to meet them. You gather your slightly cleaner clothes in a woven basket and head home, the wind catching the damp hem of your skirt or trousers. The sun is dipping low again. Another day of partial cleanliness, half victories, and dirt that always finds its way back. You didn't win exactly, but neither did the grime. You're up early again the next morning, though calling it morning feels generous. It's more like a dim grey pre-dawn drizzle. The kind that seeps through your socks no matter how fast you walk. But you've got a mission today. It's public bathhouse day. You've heard whispers about the place on Broad Street where, for a few pence, you can actually take a full bath in a room with a door that closes. Hot water, soap that isn't a cube of sorrow, maybe even a towel that doesn't double as sandpaper. It's the stuff of legends. But let's be clear, this is not some elegant Roman spa. This is the 1850s version of public hygiene reform. And while noble in intention, it's still very much a Victorian experience. You round the corner and spot the bathhouse, a squat brick building that looks like a schoolhouse mated with a warehouse and forgot to have windows. A small queue of equally grimy hopefuls waits at the door. each clutching a bundle of linens or a chipped enamel soap dish like they're entering the promised land. You get in line and immediately feel the judgment. Public baths are for the poor. That's the unspoken rule. If you had your own copper tub at home, you wouldn't be here. Bathhouses are caught in this weird limbo of being necessary but shameful. Society encourages cleanliness, sure, but not communal cleanliness. That's for people who live in those neighbourhoods. When your turn comes, you step inside and are immediately hit with a wall of steam soap and something else, mildew probably. The attendant is an older man with a face like a boiled ham and a voice that suggests he's been breathing in lye fumes for 30 years. He hands you a key and grunts. Room 5. You head down a damp hallway lined with peeling paint and doors that groan when they open, like they're mourning their own existence. Inside your private room, if you can call it that, is a tin tub, already half filled with hot water. It's slightly brown. You stare at it. It stares back. There's no drain, so when you're done, someone else will have to haul it out bucket by bucket. On a small shelf is a sliver of shared soap and a washcloth that looks like it's seen some things. You take off your clothes, hesitating as you peel away your layers, like unwrapping something best left sealed. The water is warm though, and that alone feels miraculous. You lower yourself in slowly, every inch of skin hissing like it's forgotten what heat feels like. The tub is small, your knees are pressed to your chest and your elbows hit the sides, but you're in. You're actually in. It's a whole body bath, and no one's using the water before or after you. This is luxury. This is victory. You wash, you scrub. You dare to use the soap and watch it create actual bubbles. You dunk your hair and feel weeks of coal dust slide away. For a few glorious moments, you almost feel modern. Until you catch sight of the water again, now murky and lined with a ring of shame. You get out as quickly as you got in, dripping onto the cold stone floor and wrapping yourself in your personal towel, which now seems laughably small for your soaked, goose-pimpled body. You dress again, slipping your freshly washed but still threadbare clothes onto the slightly damp skin. Outside the room, a line has already reformed, and the bathhouse is getting louder. More people talking, coughing, clattering down the hallway in wooden-soled shoes. It's a reminder that you're part of something bigger, a shared struggle to achieve cleanliness in a world stacked against it. Here's the historical fact nestled in all this. Public bathhouses like the one you just visited were part of a major push in Victorian Britain to address urban sanitation. The Public Baths and Wash Houses Act of 1846 allowed local authorities to build places like this, aimed at giving the working poor access to cleanliness and dignity. It was a real shift, a sign that maybe, just maybe, society was starting to understand that hygiene wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Of course, not everyone agreed. There was plenty of resistance. Some said bathhouses would encourage laziness or immorality because, nothing corrupts the soul faster than warm water and a sense of well-being. Others complained about the cost or worried they'd be used as dens of vice. And let's not forget the ever-present classism. Even as public hygiene became a public concern, the people who used these facilities were often judged for needing them. But for you, today you feel a little better. You've boiled the week off your skin, you've done your part to not smell like 1850. And as you step back onto the street, the chill morning air hits your clean face like a slap from the future. For a few hours at least, you're ahead of the game. Still, there's a lingering question. How often can you do this? Once a week if you're lucky, twice a month more realistically. The price isn't outrageous, but time is its own currency. If you're working 12 hours a day and collapsing into your mattress at night, are you really going to spend your one day off at the bathhouse? Most don't. That's why the public bath routine, while noble in idea, never fully solved the hygiene crisis. Outside the bathhouse, you pass a group of children playing with sticks and rags, their faces smudged with soot, their laughter unbothered by the dirt that coats them like a second skin. One of them waves a piece of string like a whip. Another picks something off the ground and eats it. You shake your head but smile. This is just life. Dirty, yes, but not necessarily miserable. Just real. There's a fringe practice, by the way, you might have heard the whispered about among the herbalist types. The dry bath. It involves brushing your body with a stiff bristle brush. No water, no soap, just friction and pain. The idea is to stimulate circulation and remove dead skin. It's popular with some Victorians who fear cold water but still want to avoid being crusty. You tried it once, never again. You still have brush lines. The debate, as always, simmers beneath it all. Did these bathhouses actually work? Did they reduce disease, improve morale, change lives? Some say yes, the statistics on improved public health suggest real benefits. Others argue that without clean clothes, clean water and proper sewage, baths were just temporary fixes for a much bigger rot. But even a temporary fix can feel like salvation when your pores haven't breathed since Easter. By late afternoon you're back home, hair slightly damp, body strangely tired from the sheer novelty of cleanliness. Your house smells the same, boiled food, smoke, there's damp wood, but you feel ever so slightly separate from it, like you're floating just above the muck for now. You hang your towel to dry, already planning to reuse it at least 3 more times before you'll even think about laundering it. And then you notice your neighbour walking past the window. She sniffs the air as she walks, catches your eye, and gives you the faintest of nods. A small acknowledgement, woman to woman, human to human, in you bathe today. Respect. By the next day, your bathhouse glow has already started to fade. Cleanliness, like happiness in the Victorian era, is fleeting. You're standing in your narrow kitchen space, really more of a hallway with a stove, and scrubbing a pan with the edge of a crusty towel when you realise your hands still smell like lard and wood smoke. You pause, you sniff. Is that beef? No, not beef exactly, something beef adjacent. And that, dear listener, is your cue to meet the unsung horror of Victorian hygiene. The soap. Let's not sugarcoat it. Victorian soap is gross. It's not the soft, flower-scented bar you lather up with today. It's a squat, gritty brick that smells faintly of livestock and misery. And it's made from the sort of ingredients you don't ask too many questions about. The primary one? Tallow, rendered animal fat. That's right. Your soap is basically a solidified stew of boiled down beef or mutton fat, mixed with lye, and maybe, a few drops of lavender oil if someone's feeling fancy. You reach for the soap sitting on the basin. It's slightly sour-wishy in the centre from repeated use, and has what looks like a hair embedded in it. You rinse it under cold water, as if that helps, and set to work scrubbing your dishes, your hands, and the same part of the countertop you've cleaned 3 times now, just to make yourself feel a little more in control of your life. The soap doesn't smell clean, not exactly. It smells strong, the kind of smell that could wake someone from a coma or chase a raccoon out of your cupboard. Now, here's the twist. This tallow-based concoction actually works. Lye is incredibly effective at breaking down grease and grime. It's also a skin-peeling, eye-burning chemical that can cause some real damage if you're not careful. And since most soap making happens at home, usually by women who are multitasking with toddlers, boiling water, and 6 other unpaid jobs, accidents are common. You've heard stories of people going temporarily blind from a splash of caustic lye, or of burns that never quite healed right. Homemade hygiene was always one slip away from disaster. But soap is essential. The Victorians are starting to get the idea, slowly, that cleanliness might actually help stop disease. Not because they understand bacteria, yet, but because they've noticed people who wash more tend to get sick less. It's an emerging theory that will eventually lead to germ theory, but for now, it's mostly based on vibes and trial and error. Doctors and reformers hand out soap in poor neighbourhoods like it's medicine. And honestly, in some cases it is. And it wasn't just household soap being passed around. There was a booming soap industry trying to cash in on the hygiene panic, peddling products with names like Lifebuoy and Pear's transparent soap, which was literally see-through and marketed as a luxury item. You could spot one in a shop window and think that's what rich people must smell like. Of course, many of these commercial soaps were still made with the same old animal fat, just scented to high heaven with pine tar or lemon oil. You were basically buying a slightly more fragrant version of Grandma's kitchen experiment. You remember one time seeing a soap advertisement in the paper. It featured a dainty Victorian woman holding a bar the size of a brick, smiling as if she didn't just flay the top layer off her skin in the name of sanitation. The ad claimed that a woman's virtue may be judged by the cleanliness of her linens. That's a real sentiment from the time, because in classic Victorian fashion, even soap wasn't just about hygiene, it was about morality. A clean woman was a good woman. A dirty one? Well, say no more. There's a fringe soap fad making its rounds lately in the more eccentric corners of society. Arsenic soap. Yes, you heard that right. Arsenic. The same stuff used in rat poison and suspicious accidental deaths. Some believed arsenic had beauty-enhancing properties when applied to the skin in small doses. It supposedly gave the skin a pale, luminous glow, perfect for women trying to achieve that fashionable tuberculosis look. You heard about a woman who used it religiously, right up until her fingernails started falling off. Coincidence? The scholarly debate here? whether soap was more widely used than we give the Victorians credit for. Some researchers argue that most people washed regularly with soap, at least their hands and faces. Others say the cost, combined with the effort of getting water in, and the rarity of effective soap, meant most folks just did what they could with plain water and friction. The truth, again, likely depends on your class, your gender, and whether you lived in a city or the countryside. For you, the reality is simpler. This bar of soap, humble and vaguely meat-scented, is one of your most precious possessions. You use it sparingly, trying to make it last the month. If it breaks in half, you keep both pieces. If a guest comes over and asks to borrow some, you pretend you're out. Soap is currency. Soap is power. You set the bar back on its now cracked dish, where it immediately starts to melt into a slick puddle. No matter. You wipe your hands on your apron and carry on with your day, now at least nominally clean, even if you're still a little pink from the lice scrub. Out on the street, you pass a soap seller pushing a cart. He shouts about the purity of his product, waving around wrap bars that look far too smooth to be real. "Rose water and milk," he cries. "A scent fit for Her Majesty." You eye him warily. It probably smells like turnips, but maybe, just maybe, if you had a little spare change this week. Still, you hold off, because you know the secret. Clean doesn't have to smell like roses. It just has to smell like not feet. And if your soap smells like an old stew pot but keeps the neighbours from avoiding you on the street, well, then it's doing its job. Later that night, as you peel off your sweat-damp underclothes and give your face a quick swipe with a damp rag, you catch the lingering scent of your tallow soap in the air. It's sharp, earthy, almost comforting in a weird way. You breathe it in and think, not bad for boiled beef fat. It's a few days later and the weather's turned foul. Rain clings to the air like soup steam, settling in your lungs and sticking to the damp wool of your coat. You wrap your scarf tighter, already wet through, and sniff, mostly out of habit, because your nose hasn't been clear in 3 years. But today isn't about your lungs or your laundry. Today's focus is your teeth, or what remains of them. You duck under a crooked awning to get out of the drizzle and brace yourself for the Victorian dental routine, also known as just pretend your mouth isn't slowly decaying. It starts, of course, at home. You don't have a toothbrush in the modern sense. What you do have is a kind of stiff bristled brush, sometimes made with bone handles and animal hair. Or if you're unlucky, stiff straw fibres gears jammed into a wood block. It looks more like something you'd use to clean your boots. You wet it barely because water's precious, and dip it into your personal dental cleaning powder. That powder? It's crushed eggshell, powdered charcoal or brick dust, depending on your budget and level of self-punishment. Mint flavouring if you're a true aristocrat. You, unfortunately, are not. The brushing is rough, not so much cleaning as it is scouring. There's no gentle circular motion. You scrape your teeth like you're sanding paint off an old fence. Your gums bleed, your mouth tastes like chimney soot, and when you spit into the bowl it is black. Charcoal's all the rage lately. It supposedly absorbs bad smells, which Victorians are always trying to defeat. You rinse with cold water and feel the sting in your gums. Congratulations. You're now 4% less likely to lose your teeth this year. Maybe. If you're lucky enough to be in the upper middle class, your toothpaste might come in a metal tin with a picture of a woman smiling despite clearly having no teeth at all. These pastes are a step up, made of soap, chalk and mysterious flavourings with delightful names like Dr. Phelps Purifying Dentifrice or Mrs. Winslow's Magical Enamel Paste. One advertises minted mercury infusion, which is exactly as bad as it sounds. But branding is everything. You buy hope, not hygiene. Here's the cringy fringe fact. Some Victorians believed you could strengthen your gums by rubbing them with salt, lemon juice, or even a cloth soaked in ammonia. Yes, ammonia. It stings, it burns. But hey, you can feel it working, right? People swore by it. You tried it once. The memory alone makes your gums flinch. Now, about flossing. It doesn't exist. Or if it does, it's you picking your teeth with a splinter of wood and calling it oral maintenance. The idea of scraping between teeth is something dentists do. And dentists, well, that's a whole separate level of trauma. You head to the local apothecary, a shop that smells like herbs, turpentine and lies. You're not there for toothpaste, but while waiting for the woman ahead of you to buy something called female nerve tonic, you look over the dental supplies. There's a bottle labelled tooth elixir, a thin greenish liquid that claims to tighten teeth to the gums and render breath sweet as summer rain. It costs more than a week's worth of bread. You pass. Eventually, though, you know this can't go on. one of your molars has started to throb. Not constantly, but in waves. Sharp, cold stabs that come when you bite anything firmer than a boiled carrot. So you do what every Victorian dreads, you visit the dentist. It's not a clinic, it's a room at the back of a barber's shop. The sign outside reads, "Tooth extraction and haircuts. Appointments optional." Inside, the air is thick with hair oil and something metallic. The dentist barber is a large man with enormous sideburns and a stained apron. He gestures for you to sit in what looks like a kitchen chair and begins rummaging through a tray of tools that resemble gardening equipment. There is no anaesthesia, maybe a sip of gin, if you brought your own. He asks what's wrong. You point to the offending tooth. He nods, holds up a pair of pliers that could pull nails out of wood, and says, "Should be quick." You have never been so afraid. The pain is indescribable. Sharp, hot, tearing, followed by a cold numbness that's less relief and more shock. He doesn't stop to ask if you're all right. He holds up the tooth like a trophy, wipes your blood on his apron, and mutters, "Good root on that one." You stagger out, clutching your jaw, and taste blood for the rest of the day. Congratulations, you're now one tooth lighter and one trauma heavier. Here's a bitter little historical detail. Most Victorian dentistry was focused entirely on removal. Fillings existed, sure, but they were rare and expensive. If a tooth hurt, it was probably coming out. False teeth were common, especially for the wealthy. You'd think they'd be porcelain, but early on many were made from real human teeth, harvested from the dead or from desperate people selling their molars for cash. They were called Waterloo teeth after the battlefield that conveniently supplied so many. There's some debate among scholars about just how terrible Victorian teeth really were. Some argue they were healthier than we assume, especially among rural populations who ate less sugar and had a less processed diet. Others point to the mountains of dental advertisements, the grave robbing, and the rise of false teeth as clear signs that yes, mouths were a battlefield. The truth, like most things, probably falls somewhere in between. Diet mattered, genetics mattered, but access to real dental care was a luxury. Back home, you lie on your mattress, a wadded rag stuffed in your cheek, and stare at the ceiling. There's a dull, echoing throb in your jaw that seems to sync with your heartbeat. You're tired, you're in pain. And all of this started because you wanted to chew something with texture. You glance at your toothbrush, if you can call it that, sitting on the basin. It leans to one side like it's also had a long day. You pick it up and give it a half-hearted rinse, knowing full well that without sugar control, proper dental tools or fluoride, you're just delaying the inevitable. But still you brush. Maybe you'll switch to soot again tomorrow. Maybe the barber dentist will invest in chloroform. Maybe your next tooth will fall out clean. Hope, after all, is the strongest medicine a Victorian has. You wake up the next morning feeling like your jaw's been assaulted by a crowbar, and frankly it has. The empty space where your molar used to be throbs like a guilty secret. You rinse your mouth with cool water and try not to think about what bacteria might be partying in there. But because life in Victorian times is one long relay race of bodily discomfort, today you've got a new battle waiting. Your hair. Or more accurately, the sweaty, itchy, grease-glazed thicket on your head has been slowly evolving into its own ecosystem. You drag your fingers through it and stop when they snag halfway down. There's a crunching noise, probably just soot, or maybe a small twig, or maybe a sentient grease goblin. Who can say? Either way, it's time to tackle the beast. Now here's the awkward truth. Victorians didn't wash their hair very often. Weekly if you were diligent, monthly if you weren't, and for some only when the seasons changed or they caught head lice, which was often. You, like most, have developed a routine based less on cleansing and more on managing the mess. You fetch your comb, heavy, wide tooth chipped at the corner, and begin the long, slow process of detangling. This isn't a peaceful spa ritual, this is warfare. Every stroke tugs at your scalp like it's trying to steal your soul. You wince but keep going, because if you don't, the knots will form a kind of dreadlocked exoskeleton, and you'll have to shear it all off like a sheep at springtime. You consider washing it, really washing it, but that's a major operation. First, you'd need to heat water, lots of it. Then you'd have to haul it, pour it into a basin, and mix in something approximating shampoo. Unfortunately, shampoo as you know it doesn't exist yet. Instead, you've got options like soap shavings, egg yolks, brandy, or, if you're feeling daring, onion juice. Someone once told you that rubbing your scalp with gin makes your hair grow faster. You tried it once. It just made your head smell like heartbreak and poor decisions. you settle for something more traditional, a mixture of vinegar and rainwater stored in a bottle that looks suspiciously like it used to hold medicine. It stings your scalp but makes your hair marginally less horrifying. You pour it over your head in sections, flinching as it runs into your eyes. There's a brief moment where the vinegar smell overpowers the usual musty odour in your room, and you actually feel alive. Not clean, not even close, but vinegar fresh, which, by Victorian standards, is practically glamorous. Once rinsed, you wrap your hair in a ragged towel and sit by the fire. You'll be sitting there for hours. Because drying takes forever, and damp hair is, according to your Aunt Miriam, an invitation for death to crawl in through the scalp. She might not be medically trained, but her conviction is strong. So you dry it the old-fashioned way, slowly, while staring into the flames like you're remembering a war. While you wait, you pull out your grooming kit. It's a small tin box with a broken latch, and inside it holds your hairpins, comb oil, and, ah yes, the lice comb. A tiny, vicious-looking tool with teeth so close together they could shred fabric. And yes, head lice are a real and regular issue, even for respectable people. Baths might be rare, but infestations are not. If you've never had them, you will. If you've had them once, congratulations. They've probably come back with friends. So you start combing inch by painful inch and scraping the teeth of the comb through your scalp and watching for movement. Sometimes you find nothing. Sometimes you find too much. Today you spot one, just one. You pretend you didn't. You squint at the floorboard like it's a metaphor and keep combing. Maybe it was just a bit of dirt, very leggy bit of dirt. Historically, lice were so common that people barely commented on them unless things got really dire. There were powders you could use, made from crushed herbs, tobacco EO, or even arsenic dust if you had no will to live, but mostly people just combed and hoped. Hats were shared cautiously. Hair ribbons were a luxury and often repurposed from other things, including curtain cords, and if all else failed, you shaved your head and wore a wig, pretending it was fashion and not pest control. Speaking of wigs, let's take a detour to the upper crust. Wealthy Victorians, especially men, had access to all sorts of hair tonics and oils, many of which promised miraculous growth or sheen. Some were even sold with names like Dr. Taylor's Cranium Invigorator or Madame Gracie's Hair Bloom. You once tried a free sample of one and your hair smelled like rosemary and turpentine for a week. Not bad, until the rash started. There's actually a lingering debate among historians about how greasy Victorian hair really was. Some argue people used powders, like orris root or starch, to absorb oil between washes. Others say that for the average working person, hair was simply what it was. A tool for warmth, display, or modesty, not necessarily a beacon of hygiene. After all, cleanliness was often measured in terms of appearance, not reality. You check your reflection in a cracked piece of mirror propped against the wall. Your hair is dryish, vaguely less tangled, and now tied back in a bun with only a few rogue strands attempting mutiny. You dab on a little rose oil, just a drop, because it's what your mother used to do before church, and even though there's no service today, it feels like a ritual worth keeping. Plus, it masks the vinegar. Before you leave the house, you pop on your bonnet or cap, which serves multiple functions. It hides the frizz, contains any lingering lice, and makes it look like you've got your life together. Bonus, it keeps the coal dust out when you walk through the street. You step outside into the afternoon air, and already you feel the wind undoing your hard work. But that's fine. The illusion of cleanliness lasts just long enough to pass as intentional. As you head down the road, you pass a man selling hair combs and small jars of oil. He gives you a nod. You nod back. This is how Victorians flirt, through mutual understanding of scalp maintenance. Back home that night, you pull off your cap and run your fingers through your hair. It's still a bit damp underneath, and somehow you're still finding soot near your part. But you can't remember the last time it felt this soft. You lie down on your mattress with your head wrapped in a cloth to keep it clean overnight. Though, let's be honest, you'll wake up with it matted in 10 directions and probably pressed into a button. But for now, your scalp doesn't itch. Your hair doesn't crackle when touched. And you fall asleep with the faint scent of vinegar and rose oil tickling your nose, which, in a world like this, is a win. It's sometime around 3 a.m. when the scratching wakes you up. Not yours, someone else's. Through the thin wall between your room and the neighbours, you hear the rhythmic, desperate scritch, scritch, scritch of fingernails meeting scalp, a sound so intimate and ancient that it feels like you've been transported into a primal grooming circle. You lie still for a moment, blinking into the darkness, listening as the sound stops, then starts again. Whoever it is, they are not sleeping tonight, and now neither are you. By morning you're itchy too. Maybe it's psychological, maybe it's lice, maybe it's just your mattress, which is a hay-filled ticking bag that likely predates the Crimean War. You sit up and try to smooth down your hair, then notice your shirt clinging a little too enthusiastically to your back. A quick sniff confirms what you already suspect: you're not exactly radiating freshness today. Which brings you to a central question in the ongoing saga of Victorian hygiene. What exactly is one supposed to do when full-body bathing isn't on the menu and you smell like a damp chimney? The answer, dear friend, is simple. You fake it. Today's plan is the classic surface wipe. You fetch your rag, grubby but serviceable, and wet it with cold water from the pitcher by your washstand. Then comes the ritual. Armpits first, always, then the crook of your elbows behind the knees, neck, and, if you're feeling fancy, your feet. You splash on a little vinegar water, your go-to deodorizer, and air yourself out by the window while pretending the foggy view of rooftops is romantic and not depressing. But even with all your efforts, there's no denying it. You feel gross. And it's your clothes. You've been re-wearing the same underthings for days now, and even though you scrubbed them in last week's laundry marathon, they're no match for your sweat, the smoke from your fire, and the general ambience of coal dust and must. Is like trying to stay clean while living inside a loaf of old bread. So today, you decide to change. Not all your clothes, just the essentials, the things closest to your skin, which leads us to one of the most underappreciated horror stories of Victorian hygiene, the undergarment situation. Victorian underwear is complicated. For starters, it's not the sleek, stretchy stuff you're used to. It's made of linen, cotton or flannel. Depending on the season and your social class, you've got your chemise, kind of long, baggy undershirt, your drawers, baggy, knee-length pants, often open in the crotch because reasons, maybe a corset or stays if you're going anywhere public. Men wear long wool or cotton combinations, basically early union suits, which manage to be both sweaty and itchy. And washing these garments is a nightmare, so people often just don't. You peel off your chemise and hold it up to the light. It's not technically dirty, but it also smells like a combination of body odour, wood smoke and distant despair. You toss it into the laundry pile and pull on your spare, which is slightly less depressing. Then you face your drawers. Here's your quirky fringe fact of the day. Many Victorian women didn't wear underwear at all, at least not in the modern sense. Drawers were a relatively new invention in the mid-19th century, and even when women wore them, they were often crotchless. Yes, you heard that right. Not for fun, but for function. Makeshift toilets and chamber pots were tricky when you were wearing 8 layers of skirt and petticoat. Open drawers made things easier. It's practical, in a terrifying sort of way. Of course, that meant hygiene was precarious at best. You do your best today with what you've got, changing into the least wrinkled pair and pretending they smell like lavender. You finish dressing, layer your petticoats, 3 today, cold air is creeping in, and lace up your bodice with stiff fingers. Every tug on the laces feels like a compromise between mobility and looking vaguely put together. You catch sight of yourself in the mirror. Your hair is pinned back, your clothes are cleanish, and your collar is lying mostly flat. You look fine, but the truth is, you still feel dirty. There's a heaviness on your skin that no amount of vinegar or perfumed sachets can quite lift. It's not dirt exactly, it's the residue of a world that simply doesn't believe in comfort. Stepping outside, you're hit with the usual morning barrage of smells. Horses, wet cobblestones, soot, bacon grease wafting from someone's window, and the ever-present undercurrent of human funk. It's like walking through a sensory soup. You pull your shawl tighter and join the slow-moving crowd heading toward the market, trying not to think about how many of these people also haven't changed their underwear in a week. You pass a street vendor selling lace-trimmed handkerchiefs and paws. Victorians carry them everywhere, not just for blowing noses, but for dabbing sweat, covering smells and sending discreet signals during courtship. You pick one up and bring it to your face, it smells like starch and rosewater. You buy it, not because you need it, but because sometimes it's nice to pretend. There's a scholarly debate floating around in dusty journals about how often Victorians actually changed their undergarments. Some argue it was weekly, others say daily changes were encouraged in upper-class manuals, even if no one followed through. What we know for sure is that washing underclothes was labour-intensive, and most people just didn't have the time, soap, or water to keep up with it. Smelling slightly right wasn't a social deal breaker, it was the baseline. On your way home, the clouds break just long enough to let through a beam of sunlight. It hits a woman on the corner who's airing out her corset on the windowsill. She gives you a nod. There's a quiet solidarity among people trying to survive their laundry cycles. Back inside, you hang your discarded chemise over the back of a chair, hoping the draft from the cracked window will dry out some of the funk. You settle into your evening routine, wipe the worst of the day off your skin, rinse your face, comb your hair, you dab a little lemon oil behind your ears. Not because it helps, just because it makes you feel a tiny bit human. As the fire crackles and your mattress cools, you realise something strange. You're used to this. The feeling of being almost clean, of never quite arriving at fresh, but hovering somewhere near passable. And that's the secret truth of Victorian hygiene. It's not about sparkle, it's about scraping by. About finding ways to live in your body when the world gives you vinegar, soot, and open-crotch underwear. You climb into bed, wrap yourself in the heavy, vaguely scratchy blanket, and tuck your fresh handkerchief under your pillow like a little luxury. You're not clean, but you're clean enough. And in this world, that's as good as it gets. You're jolted awake before dawn by the sound of something sloshing, followed by a very human grunt and a splash. You lie there, blinking in the darkness, trying to convince yourself you dreamt it. But no, the sound comes again, unmistakably the heavy scrape of porcelain on floorboards, the dull thud of something liquid meeting wood, and the unmistakable aroma of human waste meeting fresh morning air. That, my friend, is the symphony of a chamber pot being emptied. And no, you're not hallucinating. This is just how people use the bathroom in the Victorian age, if they are lucky enough to have a pot in the first place. Welcome to one of the grimmest corners of hygiene history, the dark, damp, and altogether unfortunate world of 19th century human waste management. Let's start with the basics. There is no indoor plumbing for most people. None. Your toilet, if you can call it that, is a ceramic pot with a handle and a lid, tucked discreetly under the bed or in a wooden commode with a seat built in. It doesn't flush, it doesn't seal, it sits there overnight, collecting everything, and every morning it must be emptied, preferably before breakfast. You sit up slowly, still groggy, and consider your own chamber pot under the bed. You used it around midnight after stumbling out of a half-sleep trying not to trip over your boots. You didn't light a candle. No need. You've perfected the art of sleepy navigation. But now comes the tricky part. Someone has to take it outside and dump it, and that someone is, well, you. You gingerly lift the pot. It's heavier than you'd like. You try not to look directly into it. Nothing good can come of that. And wrap it in an old towel to keep it from clinking. Then comes the stealth walk. Down the hallway, past the closed doors of your neighbours, who are also clutching their own pots, down the stairs that creak in protest, out the back door into the chilly morning air. You make your way to the designated dumping spot, usually a communal cesspit, outdoor privy, or if you're lucky, a small trench covered by wooden planks. You pour it out. There's always splashback, no matter how careful you are. You step back, wipe your hands on your apron, and gag only once before heading back inside. Here's the historical truth. Before proper sewer systems were widespread, human waste disposal was a nightmare. In poorer neighbourhoods, people often dumped their chamber pots directly into the street gutters. The phrase garde-l'eau, a bastardisation of the French, regardez-l'eau or watch out for the water, was shouted before tossing a pot's contents out a window. You're walking down a city street and suddenly, splat, it hits your shoulder. You've been blessed. Public health reformers of the mid-19th century were horrified by this. It wasn't just disgusting, it was deadly. The streets ran with filth. It seeped into the ground. It fouled the drinking water. Cholera and typhoid spread like rumours. In response, the city introduced something called the night soil man, a person whose actual job was to come around after dark and collect waste from homes. He'd shovel, haul and cart it away, often to be used as fertiliser outside the city. Imagine that job. Now imagine how much they'd have to pay you. And then realise they didn't pay them enough. You've seen one or two of them on your street. Gaunt, soot-faced, dressed in layers to ward off the stink. No one looks them in the eye. No one thanks them. They're part of the machine that keeps Victorian cities just barely livable. And here's your fringe fact. In some more rural or desperate urban areas, people didn't even use chamber pots. They used slop jars, buckets, or dug shallow ditches called earth closets. Some even went behind sheds or in alleyways, especially children. You've seen it. Everyone has. It's never really shocking, just another part of life. Just one more thing to sidestep. But let's not pretend that the wealthy had it much better. Sure, the upper classes had indoor water closets earlier, especially by the 1870s and onward. These were primitive toilets with flushing mechanisms, often porcelain and built into elegant cabinetry. But they weren't perfect. Sewer systems were still developing, pipes frequently clogged, and the stink could be unbearable. Some homes had bell pulls to summon servants to flush or empty the bowl afterward. Imagine being buzz rich, you outsource your own waste. Then imagine being the person on the receiving end of that bell. Scholars debate the true impact of the chamber pot lifestyle on public health. Some argue that it was manageable if done with care. Others point out the overwhelming evidence of disease outbreaks tied to unsanitary waste disposal. What's clear is that as cities grew, the old system simply couldn't keep up. When hundreds of thousands of people are emptying pots into the same streets, something's got to give. And it did, catastrophically, in events like the Great Stink of 1858, but that's a horror show for another section. Back in your room, you rinse the pot as best you can with cold water and a splash of vinegar. Some people use carbolic acid or sprinkle ash in the bottom to keep the smell down. You do what you can, then slide it back under the bed, nose wrinkling all the while. A little lavender sachet in the corner helps. Barely. Now you get dressed as usual and go about your day. You'll try not to think about the fact that you're walking the same streets that were soaked with waste just a few hours ago. You'll try not to breathe too deeply when a wagon wheel rolls through a puddle of suspicious origin and splashes your hem. You'll try to pretend that the faint, sour smell trailing behind your neighbour isn't what you think it is. And somehow it's normal. That's the most astonishing part. You've adapted to a world where human waste isn't hidden behind doors and plumbing, but woven into the rhythm of daily life. Everyone smells a little off. Everyone's been peed on by a chamber pot at least once. And everyone dreads the sound of that morning splash. That night, as you climb into bed, the chamber pot waits faithfully beneath you. Not glamorous, not discreet, but dependable. A porcelain reminder that in Victorian life, cleanliness is always relative, and convenience sometimes means keeping a bowl of your own filth just inches from where you sleep. You're walking along the Thames on a rare clear morning, the kind where the fog lifts just enough to reveal the outline of rooftops and chimney stacks leaning in like gossiping old men. For once, the air smells almost tolerable. Still thick with soot and a whiff of fish guts, sure, but for Victorian London, this is basically alpine freshness. You take a deeper breath and immediately regret it. Because underneath the more familiar odours is that unmistakable scent. Something rotting, something more human. That's when it hits you. This city has no idea what to do with its own waste. Welcome to pre-sewer London, where the population is exploding and the infrastructure is collapsing under the weight of its own, output. Today, you're taking a slow stroll through the invisible history beneath your feet. The dark, overflowing, disease-breeding underbelly of 19th century sanitation, or lack thereof. Now, when you think of a sewer, you probably imagine an underground tunnel lined with brick, vaguely wet but mostly contained. The Victorians? Not quite there yet. For most of the early 1800s, London's waste management system was a loose, chaotic mix of cesspools, open drains, and haphazard trenchwork that all eventually led, one way or another, back to the Thames. The same Thames that snakes gracefully through the heart of the city. The same Thames where washerwomen clean clothes, where ships unload goods, where children swim, and yes, the same Thames that still supplies the city's drinking water. You stop at a bend in the river and peer down. The water is dark, sluggish, and studded with floating debris. Bits of food, pieces of cloth, what may or may not be a dead rat, and, just for flair, a lone boot. The stench rises with the morning sun, a hot, thick wave of rot and chemicals and decay. You pull your collar over your nose, not that it helps. The real kicker, this isn't unusual, this is every day. People living in the city produce mountains of waste, human, animal, and industrial. That waste goes somewhere. And more often than not, it ends up in cesspools, basically pits dug beneath or behind homes, lined with brick and meant to hold waste until it can be removed. But these pits aren't sealed. They leak. They overflow. They mix with rainwater and kitchen runoff and dead pets and whatever else people throw out their windows, the ground under your feet is soaked with a slow-moving soup of sickness. Eventually, cesspool emptiers, night soil men, again, bless their souls, come around to collect what's been fermenting down there. You've seen it once, a man lowered into the pit by rope, shovel in hand, scooping out human waste by lantern light. When he emerged, he looked like a ghost dredged in filth, eyes glassy from the stench, skin stained from exposure. The phrase earning a living suddenly felt very literal. But the problem isn't just what people are doing with their waste, it's what the city isn't doing. London has no coordinated sewer system in the early 1800s. Instead, waste runs through open ditches or down ancient medieval drains that were never designed for a population of 2 million. And every year, more people arrive. More waste is created. And the river? It just takes it all in, like a long-suffering aunt who never learned to say no. You pause at a small footbridge and watch as someone empties a basin directly into the water. It hits with a plop, barely making a ripple. A dog sniffs along the edge, then laps at the water. You gag a little. The worst part is, this is considered normal behaviour. Here's your historical fact for the day. By the 1840s and 1850s, cholera outbreaks are sweeping through London, killing thousands. At first, no one knows why. The dominant theory is miasma, the belief that bad smells cause disease, which makes sense given how deeply everything stinks. Reformers push for more ventilation, more windows, more flowers. People stuff their nostrils with herbs and walk the streets in perfumed handkerchiefs. They are treating the symptoms of a much darker cause. And then comes the scientific hero no one believed at first, Dr. John Snow. In 1854, he traces a cholera outbreak in Soho to a specific water pump on Broad Street. He removes the handle. The deaths stop. It's the beginning of the end for the miasma theory and the dawn of modern epidemiology. But convincing people that water, not air, is the problem, that takes time. And death. A lot of it. Now, for your fringe fact. Some Victorians, long before Snow, noticed that animals seem to avoid certain water sources. There are scattered reports of cats refusing to drink from city pumps, or horses falling ill after drinking from troughs near cesspools. People joked about it, but didn't make the connection. Turns out the animals knew more than the doctors did. As you walk along the riverbank, your boots squelch through mud that might be more than just mud. You try not to think about it. At one point you spot a barge floating past low in the water, loaded with barrels labelled waste. Where is it going? Maybe to the countryside where it'll be sold as fertiliser. Maybe to another part of the river, dumped under cover of night. You don't ask. There's an ongoing debate among historians about just how bad Victorian sanitation really was. Some say we exaggerate the squalor for effect to focusing on the worst parts. Others argue that the squalor was even worse than we realise, hidden behind polite society's obsession with lace curtains and drawing room etiquette. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Some neighbourhoods fared better, but for most of London, the smell of sewage was just a part of the daily soundtrack. You finish your walk near one of the new pumping stations, part of the massive sewage overhaul that's finally underway, led by the legendary engineer Joseph Basil Jett. He's building a network of underground sewers so vast and modern that parts of it are still used today. You stand there watching workers with shovels and bricklaying tools disappear into the ground like ants into a tunnel is a sign of change, of progress, of a future where waste doesn't live with you but beneath you. Quiet, out of sight and ideally out of nose range. You head home, tracking who knows what on your boots. You scrape them off at the door, not that it matters. The river, the street, the walls, they all bleed into each other. You light a candle, wipe down your boots with a cloth you'll never use again, and think about how much worse things could be, and how bad they already are. You wake up sweating. It's July, and the air in your room is thick and sticky, pressing against your skin like a wet wool blanket. The breeze you left the window open for never arrived. Instead, the air just sits there, barely moving, quietly stewing. Outside, the heat has turned London into an open-air compost bin. You kick off your blanket, sit up, and instantly regret the decision, because today is that kind of day. The kind you've heard your neighbours whisper about. The kind of day when the city begins to smell itself. Oh, it's 1858, and you're alive, unfortunately, during the infamous Great Stink. You don't even need to leave your room to know something is wrong. The usual medley of unpleasant aromas, cabbage, coal smoke, horse sweat, is still present, sure, but now there's something new in the air, something deeper, wetter, meaner. A thick, sulphurous, throat-coating stench that seems to seep through the walls, the floorboards, the fabric of existence itself. You walk to the window, curious and stupid, and immediately gag. It's not just bad, it's biblical. The Thames is the culprit. After decades of absorbing the waste of a booming city, raw sewage, animal carcasses, chemical runoff, and everything else that wasn't nailed down, the river has finally reached its limit. And now, under the weight of this record-setting summer heat, it's cooking. Literally. The water level is low, the sun is high, and the exposed sludge along the banks is fermenting like a cursed stew. You live near enough to the river that you can see it from your window, though today you wish you couldn't. The surface is a glistening sheet of filth, rippling gently with the occasional bubble, likely from something decomposing just beneath the surface. Rats skitter along the banks, but even they look hesitant. Seagulls scream overhead and don't bother landing. You shut the window, but it's too late. The smell is inside now, it's part of you. You do what everyone else is doing. You try to fight back with scent warfare. You reach for your vinegar-soaked cloth and tie it around your face and doesn't help. You light a stick of incense someone swore by. Makes it worse. You grab your bottle of rosewater and dab it under your nose, only to create an unholy cocktail of floral death rot. Now your room smells like a funeral in a pigsty. This is not an isolated incident. All of London is panicking. Parliament, which sits right along the river, is particularly cursed by proximity. MPs gag into their handkerchiefs. Sessions are delayed. There's talk of moving the government entirely. At one point, they soak the curtains in lime chloride to neutralise the odour. It does not work. Newspapers publish headlines like, "The stench must be stopped," and "Miasma and the doom of London." You read them and think, for once, they are not exaggerating. The city is melting down in slow motion. Businesses along the river close their doors, churches cancel services, people flee to the countryside citing seasonal illness, but really just chasing clean air. Those who stay try every folk remedy in the book: lavender sachets, vinegar baths, camphor inhalers. A woman down your street walks around with a nosegay tied to a stick like it's a personal air filter. Another carries a pouch of garlic around her neck and insists it's working, though she now smells like old soup on top of everything else. Here's your historical fact. The Great Stink of 1858 was so powerful, so undeniably horrifying, that it finally forced Parliament to act. Years of debate over London's broken sewer system had gone nowhere. Until now. Nothing motivates politicians like the stench of their own failure wafting into their office windows. Within weeks, emergency legislation is passed, giving Joseph Bazalgette full authority to build a massive modern sewer system beneath the city. It's one of the most important public health moves in British history, and it all started with a really bad smell. And here's a fringe tidbit for you. People genuinely believed the miasma could kill them just by being smelled. Some even wore wax plugs up their nostrils to block the air entirely. Others stayed indoors with windows nailed shut, choosing heatstroke over inhaling death. You've considered it. You've considered worse, like jumping in the Thames just to end it all, though ironically that might kill you faster. There's some scholarly disagreement about just how widespread the impact of the Great Stink was. Some sources say only the areas closest to the river were affected. Others insist the stench spread for miles. But one thing's certain, it was the tipping point. The moment when filth could no longer be ignored. The city had been festering for years, but now it was fermenting. You try to go about your day. You leave your house and instantly regret it. The streets are quieter than usual, but not empty. People still have to work, after all. You pass a butcher who's trying to keep flies off his meat with a bundle of mint tied to a stick. You see a flower vendor selling wilting roses, everyone grabbing them in desperation to bury their faces in. You see a group of children holding their noses and laughing, somehow immune, somehow still finding joy in this stew of despair. You make it to the grocer, grab your necessities and flee. The walk home is unbearable. The heat bakes the cobblestones. The smell is physical, like you're breathing through a wet sock soaked in swamp water. You get back inside, strip off your outer layers, and press a cool rag to your forehead, praying that someone, anyone, figures this out soon. That night, sleep does not come easily. You try to tuck a handkerchief under your pillow, soaked in lavender oil and vinegar. It's no match. The room smells like floral decomposition. You consider sleeping on the roof, you consider moving to the mountains, you settle for burying your head under the covers, knowing full well that you'll wake up drenched in sweat. You're living through a moment that history will remember. You don't know it yet, but you're standing at the edge of the modern sanitation era. Change is coming. But not today. Today the smell wins. You survive the great sort of stink, but just barely. A few more days of breathing that curdled soup air, and you are ready to permanently relocate to the bottom of a well. Now, a week later, the heat has broken, the stink has ebbed slightly, and London has returned to its baseline level of smell, less end of days, more public privy with a dash of lavender. You're back to your usual routine, avoiding puddles, dodging droppings, and trying not to inhale too deeply near the river. But you've noticed something odd. Everyone smells stronger. Not just the streets or the horses, people. Their presence hits you before their voices do. The woman selling ribbons smells like powdered flowers mashed into a sweaty armpit. The man at the corner newsstand radiates pipe smoke, whiskey and wool that hasn't seen a washboard in 6 months. And the worst part, so do you. So what do you do in a society where washing is rare, laundry's a pain and deodorant hasn't even been invented yet? You drown yourself in perfume and hope for the best. Welcome to the desperate, creative and often nose-burning world of Victorian scent culture, where covering up your natural odour is not just a personal choice, it's a full-time job. You start the day by digging through the little wooden box where you keep your nice things. A silver hairpin, a folded ribbon, a cracked comb, and there it is, a small glass vial of rose cologne water. A gift from someone long ago. You uncap it, take a cautious sniff, and instantly remember why you've been rationing it. It's strong, not unpleasant, but loud, like someone shouting, "I am clean" in floral italics. You dab a bit on your wrists, behind your ears, and, most importantly, beneath your nostrils. You'll be huffing your own perfume all day just to fight off everything else. This is how most people survive public life. No one expects actual cleanliness, just olfactory illusions. You've seen women tie scented handkerchiefs to their corsets. Men rub bay rum or sandalwood oil into their beards to disguise the smell of stale beer and neglected hygiene. There are even solid perfumes, little waxy balms you can carry in a locket, or a tiny tin, perfect for quick touch-ups when someone nearby sneezes and you don't want to taste it. Here's the historical fact to anchor all this olfactory chaos. The Victorian perfume industry exploded during the 19th century, thanks in part to industrialisation and an ever-growing obsession with personal respectability. Perfume was no longer just for the upper crust, it filtered down to the middle classes and even the working poor, often in diluted or homemade forms. And it wasn't just about smelling good, it was about smelling not disgusting. But don't picture a world that smells like a blooming English garden. Picture a world that smells like a garden someone buried a fish in. Because many of these scents were aggressive. You had floral waters so overpowering they made your eyes water. Colognes that reeked of alcohol and cloves, and mysterious musk concoctions that probably had more in common with animal glands than anything botanical. You once smelled something called Egyptian night at a market stall, and it took 3 days to fade from your coat. There's a fringe fact here that might curl your nostrils. Some perfumes were made using ambergris, a waxy, fatty substance found in the digestive system of whales, specifically expelled whale bile. It was prized for its ability to bind and preserve scent. Yes, the richest people in London were dabbing digested whale bath behind their ears, and you thought your perfume was questionable. Not all perfume was store-bought, of course. People made their own from herbs, alcohol, vinegar, and whatever they could scrounge. You remember a neighbour who swore by her homemade lavender spritz, except she made it with gin, and on hot days she smelled like a cocktail gone rancid. Another swore by crushed mint and lemon peels mixed with lard. Bold. But lard goes sour fast, and we don't talk about what happened that one summer. Scent wasn't just survival, it was strategy. Courtship, for instance, often came down to who could smell the least like a damp chimney. Perfumed gloves were a favourite among the flirtatious. Touch a hand, leave a scent, spark intrigue. Some women perfumed their letters, turning every envelope into a mini air assault. Others tucked rose petals into their bodices to gently warm throughout the day, releasing a natural scent cloud. You tried that once. The petals turned brown and left a damp spot that had everyone thinking you spilled tea on your chest. Men, meanwhile, were encouraged to embrace manly scents, citrus, sandalwood, leather. A splash of cologne before leaving the house, or maybe some pomade in the hair, and if they were really bold, a perfumed moustache wax. There's nothing quite like being up close with a gentleman who smells like lemons, tobacco and goat fat all at once, intoxicating in the worst way. Of course, there were skeptics, those who believed that strong perfume was just a way of hiding something worse. Some etiquette manuals warned against using too much, claiming it was unnatural and vulgar. You once heard a preacher rant that perfume was Satan's breath in floral disguise. He then fainted from heat stroke, which was probably not helped by the 30 layers of wool he insisted on wearing. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether Victorian perfume culture was primarily about class signalling or hygiene desperation. Some argue that scent was a way to show refinement, to say, I can afford to smell good. Others see it as a defensive tactic in an age when actual cleanliness was simply out of reach. You think it's both. People wanted to feel elegant and avoid smelling like boiled onions. By the end of the day, your own rosewater has dulled into a faint sour trace. You reapply before dinner, but the bottle's nearly empty. You'll need to find more. Maybe the market will have some. Maybe you'll mix your own. You remember hearing that soaking crushed violets in vinegar overnight makes a halfway decent wash. Or maybe you'll just save what's left for Sundays. That night you press a lavender-scented cloth against your nose as you climb into bed. The chamber pot under your bed is particularly potent this evening. The fire's out, the windows are closed, the air is still. You close your eyes and breathe in your last good scent of the day. Because in this city, perfume isn't just a luxury. It's armour. You wake up tangled in your own bedclothes, beads of sweat trickling down your temple, even though the fire's long since gone out. The heat from the day has lingered inside the walls, and it wraps around you like a second set of damp woolen sheets. You push off the covers and sit upright, disoriented, shirt sticking to your back. It's too hot to sleep and too miserable to do anything else. And you can feel the itch coming again, like your own body's trying to reject the prison of fabric it's been stuffed into. And here's the kicker. You're only wearing half of what a Victorian woman would have layered on. Today, we're going to talk about hygiene's worst-kept secret, women's bodies, and all the ways Victorian society pretended they didn't exist, at least not in any functional way. You shuffle over to the washstand and splash cool water on your face. It helps, barely. Then you strip off your underlayers, the chemise, the petticoat, the drawers, and take stock of the damage. Your thighs are chafed. Your armpits are rashy. You're starting to suspect the corset you wore yesterday left a mark that may never fade. You lean forward and peer down at yourself, examining your own skin like an archaeologist investigating a ruin. Welcome to womanhood, Victorian edition. Compressed, swaddled and sweating. The first thing you learn when you're born into this world as a woman is that your body is a problem. It's something to be hidden, managed, and above all, silenced. Cleanliness is a virtue, but discussing how to achieve it? Vulgar, embarrassing, possibly dangerous. Girls are taught how to wash behind their ears, how to lace at a corset, how to smile without sweating, but no one tells them how to properly clean down there. So what do you do when things get messy? You rely on whispered advice, strange folk remedies, and the quiet guidance of older women who've already suffered through it all. There are no sanitary pads in the modern sense. Tampons? Absolutely not. What you have is folded cloth, rags really, tied around your waist with string or pinned to a belt. They're reused, washed discreetly, and dried in secret. Because heaven forbid anyone sees a stain. A stain is scandal. A stain is proof that you are bodily. You think back to your first period. You were maybe 12 and utterly unprepared. You thought you were dying. Your mother handed you a bundle of cloth with little explanation. She said, "Every month now you'll be tired and sore. Just keep clean and say your prayers." That was it. That was your user manual for reproductive health. When the bleeding comes, you feel it, slow, heavy and inconvenient. You know the rules. No baths during your unwell days. You might catch cold or worse, let the water carry some sickness up into your womb. Instead, you do sponge baths, extra vinegar wipes, and hope the smell doesn't betray you. Because yes, Victorian women worry constantly about smell. Every day is a battle against body odour, sweat, and the paranoia that your very existence might offend someone's nose. You sit now in front of your basin, dipping a cloth in lavender water, and gently clean yourself. You do it slowly, carefully, because the skin is raw, and there are no ointments, no soothing gels, just the cool touch of water and whatever hope the herbs can offer. You pat dry and rewrap yourself in a fresh cloth. It's stiff from last week's starching, but it'll do. You tuck it into the belt and relayer your drawers and chemise, all while hoping you won't leak through by midday. Here's your historical fact: women's hygiene was almost entirely undocumented in official medical texts. Doctors, almost always men, considered the female body mysterious, volatile, and frankly, beneath their interest unless it was giving birth or causing hysteria. Sanitary products weren't widely marketed until the late 19th century, and even then, they were advertised in code. You might see something called ladies' comfort wear or monthly cloths listed in a catalogue, but never described in detail. Because acknowledging menstruation, that was unspeakable. There were fringe remedies though. Women were told to carry dried herbs in sachets to drink vinegar tonics, to avoid rich foods and strong emotions. Some believed standing barefoot on cold tiles would delay your period. Others swore by sitting over steaming water infused with sage. You tried that once. It did nothing except make your thighs smell like soup. And let's not forget pregnancy and childbirth, two of the messiest, most physically demanding experiences of a woman's life, and yet still shrouded in mystery and euphemism. Women gave birth at home, in beds soaked with sweat and blood, attended by midwives who carried their own homemade disinfectants. Hygiene was whatever you could manage with boiled water, vinegar, and sheer force of will. If you were lucky, the baby lived. If you were really lucky, so did you. There's a scholarly debate here that often gets heated. Was the repression of women's hygiene in the Victorian era a result of ignorance or control? Some argue it was a lack of knowledge. Others say it was deliberate, another way of keeping women powerless by keeping them uninformed about their own bodies. You don't need a PhD to see the truth in your own daily life. When knowledge is hidden, you suffer. When tools are withheld, you make do. But you always pay the price. You finish dressing and pin your hair up, trying not to think about the rags soaking in the corner basin. You'll wash them later, when no one's around. You'll hang them by the fire to dry and pretend they're just handkerchiefs. You'll pray no one asks. Outside, the world looks almost peaceful. Sunlight through dirty windows, a quiet street. But inside, under your layers of linen and wool and sweat and unspoken truths, you carry the full weight of your body's secrets. You carry them every day. That night you sit by the hearth sipping weak tea, staring into the flames. You can feel the ache in your lower back, the quiet throb in your abdomen. You shift in your seat and tell yourself it's normal. It always is. You've lived with discomfort so long it feels like an old companion. You blow out the candle, settle into bed, and hope the cloth holds until morning. Because in the Victorian era, being a woman isn't just about surviving the world outside. It's surviving the war inside your own skin, and doing it silently. The fog rolls in thick the next morning, one of those yellow-grey mists that clings to the streets like a damp shroud. You peer out the window and can barely see the house across the road, only the orange glow of gas lamps flickering like distant stars. Somewhere below, a cart creaks by, its wheels splashing through something that's probably more biological than rain. The city is wrapped in silence and soot, and you've got a mirror appointment. Well, not exactly a mirror appointment. More like a full ritual. Grooming, shaving, oiling, and doing your best to look like a respectable Victorian gentleman, in a world where cleanliness is loosely defined. You tug on your trousers and shrug into a shirt that was last boiled in lye 3 weeks ago. It smells like starch and stubborn effort. Over that goes a vest, then your cravat, which you attempt to tie neatly, though the knot sits like a bloated pigeon under your chin. The collar of your shirt is stiff with soap, starched until it could slice bread. But that's the point. Because in this era, a crisp collar can hide a multitude of hygiene sins. Before heading out, you turn your attention to your face. Victorian men take grooming very seriously, or at least they pretend to. You grab your shaving kit, a small wooden box filled with the bare essentials, a straight razor that's just slightly chipped, a badger hairbrush, a cracked mug, and a puck of shaving soap that smells like pine tar and ambition. You fill the mug with hot water from the kettle, swirl the brush until a weak lather forms, and begin to apply it. Watching in the mirror as your face slowly disappears behind a veil of foam, the razor's cold and merciless. You draw it down your cheek slowly, carefully, flinching each time it nicks a mole or scrapes over a bump. There's no such thing as safety razors yet, only gel, hope, and a clean rag to mop up the blood. You shave with the precision of someone who knows this isn't just grooming, it's a statement. A freshly shaven face says, "I'm civilized. I have my life in order. Please don't notice the boil on my neck." And here's your historical fact of the day. During the Victorian era, beards and moustaches were actually encouraged for a good stretch of time, especially during the mid to late 1800s. Why? Two main reasons. One, facial hair became associated with wisdom, masculinity, and virility. Two, and this is the fun one, some physicians believed that beards acted as natural air filters, catching dust and disease particles before the bay could be inhaled. Essentially, your moustache was your immune system's front line. You've opted for the modest gentleman's moustache, trimmed at the corners and combed neatly, though it has a habit of collecting crumbs and tea foam. You dab a bit of wax on your fingertips and twist the ends into subtle curls. Perfect. A tiny flourish in an otherwise dreary existence. But cleanliness isn't just about the face. You take a moment to apply hair tonic, massaging it into your scalp with your fingertips. It smells like turpentine and mint and burns a little, which naturally means it's working. You slick your hair back and admire your reflection. Not bad, considering you haven't properly washed your hair in over a week and your brush doubles as a lint collector. Now comes the cologne. You splash a bit of bay rum on your neck and wrists. It's sharp and spicy, and it instantly overpowers the background scent of mildew that never fully leaves your coat. For a few fleeting minutes, you smell like someone who's never taken a nap in a stairwell. And that's enough. You step outside and immediately blend in. The streets are filled with men like you, well-dressed, well-oiled, and possibly rotting beneath their waistcoats. It's a grand illusion. Stiff collars, clean cuffs, and polished boots can fool the eye, even if the underarms of your coat are evolving into new species. Grooming for Victorian men is all about surface-level shine. Scrub the teeth, trim the nails, brush the hat. Never mind if your socks could kill a small bird. You pass by a barber shop with its red and white pole twirling slowly in the mist. Inside, a man reclines in a leather chair, while another sharpens a razor on a strap. You've been in those chairs. The experience is part grooming, part theatre, and part mild torture. The barber slaps your cheeks with soap, scrapes away stubble with terrifying precision, and sometimes, if you're unlucky, offers to lance any facial blemishes with a special tool that looks like it belongs in a medieval dungeon. You decline every time. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some wealthier men of the era took grooming to extravagant heights. They had custom-made combs, ivory-handled brushes, cologne imported from France, and moustache curlers that looked like tiny branding irons. There were even beard bibs. Yes, little towels you wore while eating to keep crumbs out of your glorious face bush. Some men dyed their beards to hide the grey. Others rubbed lemon juice into their hair to lighten it. Victorian vanity was not a gendered sport. It was a full-contact, cologne-soaked competition. There's a scholarly debate about just how clean Victorian men really were under all that grooming. Some argue the emphasis on outward appearance, clothes, scent, polish, was a way to mask the fact that full-body hygiene was still a logistical nightmare. Others suggest that men may have had more access to washing facilities thanks to public bathhouses and barber shops, making them cleaner than their working-class sisters. Either way, the standard was never clean. The standard was presentable, and that bar was low and politely ignored. Back home, you peel off your cravat and unbutton your vest. The shirt beneath is already damp under the arms, and your collar is starting to soften at the edges. You drape the shirt over a chair to air it out and sit at the edge of your bed, rubbing your jaw where the razor left a red patch. You wonder briefly if anyone noticed. If they could smell the bay rum, if they thought even for a moment that you were a man of leisure. Because in the end, that's what grooming is in this world. Not hygiene for health, but hygiene as performance. A way to say, I matter, I try, I exist in a sea of filth, but I'm not of it. You light a candle, kick off your boots, and crawl beneath the bubbers, hair tonic still stinging your scalp. Your moustache is a little crooked now from sleep sweat, and your shirt collar lies like a dead thing over the chair. But it doesn't matter, you looked clean today, and that's what people remember. The morning light filters through your grimy window like a watery apology. You stretch, sit up, and immediately wince. Your back's sore, your legs ache, and something about your shoulder smells distressingly like soot-marinated onions. It's the kind of ache that doesn't come from aging. It comes from crawling through tight chimneys and lifting things heavier than your soul. Because today you're not a gentleman or a lady of leisure. You're a Victorian child and you're working. You're maybe 10 if that. Your hands are calloused, your fingernails are black, you've got a cough that never goes away and a layer of a grime on your skin that's less dirty and more second skin. Your shirt's too big, your shoes have holes, and your hair has been cut with scissors that were probably also used to open cans. Hygiene, not your top priority. Survival, that's more like it. Children in Victorian Britain are not swaddled in innocence. They are tiny labourers, expected to pull their weight, or more accurately, pull a load of bricks, or twist threads in a textile mill, or sweep out a factory floor for a few pence a week. You're one of them, and your day begins in the dark, usually with someone shaking your shoulder and saying, "Up now, boy," or "Come on, girl, the mill won't wait." You stumble to the wash basin and splash a handful of cold water on your face. No soap today. There wasn't enough left after your mother tried to clean the stains from her apron last night. You rub your eyes with the back of your wrist and comb your fingers through your hair, dragging out yesterday's dust, and if you're lucky, only 1 or 2 lice. You don't look in the mirror. You don't have one. You shove your feet into the boots that were never your size and make your way out into the early morning light, which glows through the coal-streaked sky like a dirty coin. The streets are already alive, barrows rolling, horses clipping, shopkeepers unlocking doors. You walk past a dead cat in the gutter, a boy chewing on a crust of bread he clearly found somewhere, and a chimney sweep calling for his crew. One of them waves at you. You nod back. You've both got the same grimy face, the same black under your nails. There's a sort of kinship in filth. Your job varies. Maybe you're in a textile mill today, standing for 10 hours next to a whirring, clattering machine, brushing lint from the gears with a stick and trying not to get your fingers caught. Or maybe you're working in a match factory, breathing in phosphorus fumes that make your jaw ache and your eyes water. Or maybe, like many poor children, you're a mudlark, scouring the banks of the Thames for anything worth selling. Nails, rags, bits of rope, bones. You've got a sack slung over your shoulder and a stick in hand prodding the muck for treasure. Here's your historical fact. Child labour in Victorian Britain wasn't just common, it was essential to the economy. Children as young as 5 worked long hours in dangerous conditions for pennies. The Factory Acts tried to regulate it, but enforcement was patchy. You'd think someone might be concerned about these children's health. You'd be wrong. No one's worried about your hygiene. Your skin is permanently grey from soot. You bathe once a week, maybe, and only because someone else hauls the water. Your clothes are never really clean, just different levels of stained. Your teeth? Wobbly at best. You've got one molar that moves every time you chew, like it's trying to jump ship. Lice are part of life. You've scratched your scalp raw more than once. Your mother checks your hair once a month, dragging a fine-toothed comb through it while muttering curses at your head like it betrayed her. Sometimes she douses your head in kerosene and vinegar, lights a fire nearby and waits. You hate that day. The smell clings to your pillow for a week, and yet somehow you endure. You play in the dirt during breaks. You share food with other kids who are equally filthy. You learn to eat with blackened fingers and don't even flinch when you find something crunchy in your bread that shouldn't be there. Your stomach, after all, is stronger than your lungs. You've heard of rich children, ones with nannies and clean beds and baths with rosewater and soft towels. You imagine them like royalty, floating around in white linen with a soft breeze always blowing through their hair. You don't envy them, well, maybe a little, but you also can't imagine living like that. What do they do all day? Read books, pet dogs, get hugged? Here's a fringe fact you once overheard. Some wealthy mothers didn't want their children to get too clean. They believed a little dirt built up the constitution. One woman was said to rub raw onions on her son's feet to prevent colds. Another refused to let her daughters bathe more than once a month, fearing skin fragility. You'd laugh if you weren't too busy wondering how you are going to get coal dust out of your ears tonight. There's debate among scholars about whether Victorian children were aware of their hygiene, or lack thereof. Some argue that because conditions were universal in poor communities, kids didn't really see themselves as dirty. Others suggest that, as children got older, especially girls, the social pressure to appear clean began early, and never let up. You've seen it in your older sister, how she washes her face 3 times a day, and scolds you for coming home with rag feet. You know she dreams of being a maid someday, where she'll wear a clean apron and maybe even get a new brush of her own. Back home, after your long day, 12 hours, maybe more, you drop your sack by the door, kick off your boots and collapse onto the nearest flat surface. Your hands are black, your nails look like they belong to a mole, your clothes are stiff with dried river muck and your feet smell like pond water that's lost hope. You clean up the only way you can, a quick rinse in cold water. Maybe a fresh shirt if there's one dry. You try to scrape the worst of the dirt off your legs with an old knife, then sit by the fire picking bits of shell and glass out of your fingers. No one tells you good job. No one asks if you're sore. You just eat what's given, yawn into your hand, and crawl under the blanket you share with your brother, who smells like rope and mould but is warm, and that's what matters. You fall asleep hard, your dreams full of rivers, soot, and the feeling of scraping something valuable from the edge of a sewer pipe. You are a Victorian child, you do not get to be clean, but you survive. It's a Monday, and you already know what that means the moment you open your eyes. Laundry day. The phrase alone is enough to make your back ache in sympathy. This isn't the modern kind of laundry day where you toss things into a machine and forget about them until they beep. No, this is the kind that starts at dawn, ends near dusk, and leaves your hands red, raw, and smelling like soap, smoke, and scorched cotton. And if you're in a working-class Victorian home, or worse, a laundry maid in someone else's, then congratulations, you've just been conscripted into the dirtiest, wettest war of the week. You start by hauling water, always with the hauling. The pump is 2 streets away and the buckets are metal and unforgiving. You trudge back and forth, arms trembling by the 3rd trip, blouse already damp from the early effort. You pour the water into the copper boiler set over the fire, your breath misting in the cool morning air as steam begins to rise. The boiler smells like soap residue, scorched wool and last week's socks. You're used to it. While the water heats, you gather the laundry, a terrifying pile of shirts, chemises, petticoats, drawers, handkerchiefs, socks, and mystery cloths that haven't seen daylight since the last laundry cycle. Everything is vaguely grey, even the whites, especially the whites. You separate the items with practiced hands, fingers moving like you're shelling peas, rough, quick, and mostly on autopilot. Whites first, then shirts, coloureds, then woolens. The worst ones, the chamber cloths, the underthings, go into a separate pile entirely. You'll deal with those later. Or not, depending on your threshold for horror. Once the water's boiling, in goes the lye soap, grated down into curls like cheese. It dissolves into a cloudy sludge that bites your eyes and stings your throat. No gloves, of course. Just your bare, cracked hands stirring the clothes with a stick long enough to double as a cane. You poke and prod the garments under, watching bubbles rise like gas escaping a swamp. Here's your historical fact. Victorian laundry day was a physically gruelling all-day task, usually done once a week at most and often less. Most homes didn't have running water, and heating enough for a full wash took hours. Clothes were scrubbed by hand with washboards, boiled, rinsed in multiple basins, wrung out, then pinned to lines to dry, assuming the weather cooperated. For working-class women it was unpaid labour on top of all their other unpaid labour. For laundry maids it was their entire life. After the boil comes the scrub. You pull the steaming clothes from the cauldron with the stick, now limp and scalding, and slam them onto the washboard. The board itself is rough wood or metal, worn smooth in places, and your hands are already numb. You lather more soap and start scrubbing like your reputation depends on it, which of course it does. Because in Victorian society, clean clothes mean morality. Never mind that you live above a tannery and can't afford more than 2 dresses. If your garments are dirty, people assume you're dirty, not just in body but in soul. A smudge on a shirt is seen as laziness, a stale odour, moral weakness. Never mind that soap costs money and water costs time, you're judged by your laundry whether you like it or not. By midday your arms feel like overcooked noodles. You've scrubbed through 3 tubs of rinse water, each slightly less brown than the last, and the pile beside you is now a heap of soaked, wrung-out fabric. Your fingertips are puckered, your apron is soaked through, your face is streaked with sweat and maybe soap or maybe tears. Who can tell at this point? And now comes drying, which would be simple if it weren't October in England and the air didn't have the humidity of a soup kettle. You hang the clothes out in the yard on ropes that sag under the weight, praying the fog stays away long enough for them to dry before mildew sets in. If it starts raining, you'll have to drag everything inside and drape it over chairs, banisters and the backs of doors. Then your house will smell like damp wool and sadness for 3 straight days. You take a moment to eat a piece of bread with jam sitting on an upturned crate in the yard. The steam from the clothes mingles with the scent of coal smoke, and you try not to think about how many weeks you've been repeating this exact process. Your hands are shaking, your shoulders sore, your lower back is staging a quiet rebellion. Here's your fringe fact. Some women used to sprinkle blue dye into the final rinse for whites. The logic: It made yellowed linens appear cleaner, an optical illusion known as bluing. You've done it yourself, swirling a bit of blue powder into the basin and watching your undershirts emerge with a hint of frost. They're still stained under the armours, of course, but now they look frosty. It's enough to fool the judgmental woman from 2 doors down, and really, isn't that the goal? There's a debate among historians about how widespread these laundry practices were. Some claim the average working-class household did minimal washing and lived in filth. Others argue that women, despite poverty, prioritised laundry with religious intensity. The truth is probably both. It was miserable but expected, and skipping it wasn't really an option unless you had no pride left to lose. As the clothes start to drip dry, you turn to the ironing, which, yes, also happens today. Irons are cast iron bricks heated on the stove, swapped out as they cool, and wielded with the fury of a woman who's been personally betrayed by every collar in the house. You press and starch the cuffs, sleeves and collars, breathing in the faint scent of scorched cotton. One wrong move and you burn a hole straight through your only good petticoat. You've done it before, you never forget it. By late afternoon, the steam in your house has thickened to fog. You've sweat through your second shirt, and your fingernails are permanently grey. You sit down to fold the finished garments, your body aching like you've climbed a mountain. But when you stack the clean linens in the chest and hang the shirts on pegs by the fire, there's a strange satisfaction, a kind of defiant pride. You've tamed the dirt. Temporarily. You've scrubbed and scalded and steamed your way back to social acceptability. For a week anyway. That night you curl up in bed beside the drying sheets, the smell of soap still clinging to your hair. Your arms twitch in your sleep from phantom scrubbing. You dream of washboards and boiling basins and a world where water comes from a tap and drying takes minutes. You wake up sore but with clean socks. And in this life that's enough. It's 2 days after laundry day, and you're already dangerously close to violating some unspoken, unwashed law of decency. You sit on the edge of your bed, sniffing the armpits of a shirt you just wore yesterday, debating whether it can be stretched for one more outing. It can't, but you're going to anyway. Because you, like most Victorians, live in a world where underwear is scarce, washing is a war, and the phrase change of clothes means the other set of things that smell slightly less terrible. Today we're diving into the very personal and often horrifying world of Victorian undergarments and all the unspeakable truths hiding beneath the respectable layers of lace and wool. You start by peeling off the undershirt you slept in, which may or may not be the same one you've worn for 3 days. It clings like a sad, damp ghost. You wrinkle your nose and hang it near the fire, hoping the rising heat will chase off the worst of the funk. You dig into the bottom of your chest for a fresh, meaning less visibly soiled, chemise and drawers. The chemise is plain cotton, thin in places, and the drawers are open crotch because of course they are. Not for fashion, for logistics. And let's just say the drafts are brisk. Now here's a bitter little historical truth. Victorian people did not change their undergarments daily. In fact, some wore the same base layers for several days, if not a full week, depending on their social status, laundry situation, and threshold for shame. Those of wealth or with a full staff might have enough under things to wear a fresh set each day, though even that was rare in the early 19th century. For the working class, rotating 2 or 3 items over an entire season was completely normal. You washed them when you could, and until then, you aired them out and hoped for the best. As you step into your drawers and pull the chemise over your head, you feel that familiar weight of layers settling in. Victorian clothing is not breathable, it's not even trying to be. Between corsets, bodices, waistcoats and petticoats, your body is essentially wrapped in a Victorian burrito of wool, linen and sweat. It traps heat in summer, freezes in winter, and provides the perfect warm, moist environment for body odour to flourish like a greenhouse full of sins. You remember overhearing a neighbour once proudly declare that she only changes her drawers on the Lord's Day and wash day. That's twice a week, in case you were wondering. And she's considered respectable. In fact, changing your underclothes too often might even raise eyebrows in certain circles, like you're vain or indulgent, or possibly doing something inappropriate to get them so dirty so fast. Of course, none of this is helped by the fact that Victorian underwear is thick, absorbent, and almost impossible to fully clean. Stains linger, odours cling, you can scrub it, boil it, blue it, hang it in the sun, but it still somehow smells faintly like regret. And those menstrual cloths we mentioned earlier, they get added into the same boiling pot as everything else. You've stirred that pot, You've seen things. Here's your fringe fact for the day. Some Victorian advertisements proudly claim their underwear could be worn for a fortnight without offensive odour. That was the selling point. Not comfort, not breathability, just the promise that you could marinate in your own filth for 2 solid weeks and still pass for clean. The bar was so low it might as well have been underground. You pin your collar into the place and begin lacing up your corset. The stays dig into your ribs like a stern reminder to sit up straight and not breathe too deeply. You've worn this corset for months now. It hasn't been properly cleaned in just as long. You wipe it down occasionally with a damp rag and sprinkle lavender sachets in the wardrobe to mask the scent. But let's not pretend it isn't slowly developing a personality of its own. For men, things aren't much better. The standard undergarment is the union suit, a full-body woolen monstrosity with a flap in the back, affectionately known as the drop seat, and a neckline that always seems to itch no matter how many times you scratch. They're warm in winter, suffocating in summer, and impossible to remove in a hurry. You've watched your brother try to wriggle out of his after a night at the pub. He almost passed out halfway through. There's a scholarly debate around how common underwear really was among the lower classes. Some historians argue that for the very poor, underclothing was minimal or non-existent. Why wear extra layers if you can barely afford the top ones? Others suggest that even the poorest Victorians valued at least 1 or 2 base garments for modesty's sake, especially in a culture obsessed with propriety. The answer, as always, is it depends. On where you lived, how much you earned, and whether you had a mother who'd chase you out of the house if you tried to go without. You finish dressing and glance at yourself in the mirror. You look decent, pressed, layered, and outwardly presentable. No one can tell that you're sweating under your stays, no one can smell that your drawers were last scrubbed during the full moon. That's the Victorian trick. Appear pure, regardless of what's happening underneath. Before heading out, you hang your used underclothes near the fire to dry. You don't have time to wash them yet, but you can air them out and sprinkle a bit of cologne water to pretend they're fresh. You fold them neatly, like that alone will erase the memory of how they smelled when you peeled them off. Out in the street, you pass other people who look just like you. Well-dressed, upright, starched to the nines. But you know the truth now. Under all that polish, most of them are wearing drawers that haven't been changed since Sunday. Some of them are going commando, especially the older ones. And at least 2 of them smell like they aired out their bloomers over a fishmonger's cart. You smile, not because it's funny, but because it's so it's normal. That night you get undressed slowly, peeling off the layers one by one like you're molting. Each garment lands with a soft plop on the floor, damp with the day's labour. You rub your thighs with vinegar, hang the worst of your clothes by the window, and lie down in your chemise, praying it doesn't crawl away while you sleep. Your underwear may be far from clean, but it's been flipped, blued, spritzed, and refluffed. And in Victorian Britain, that's called doing your best. You wake to the unmistakable sound of someone retching down the hall. Not a delicate cough, not one of those polite, "I'm just a little under the weather," Victorian lady gasps. No, this is full-bodied, gut-emptying, soul-exiting retching, and judging by the echo of it in the narrow corridor, you're guessing it's coming from one of the lodgers on the 2nd floor. Again. You sit up, blanket twisted around your legs, and try to breathe through your mouth, but even that's risky. The air is warm, wet, and smells like boiled potatoes left out too long. Welcome to boarding house life, where shared walls, shared meals, and shared microbes come standard, and where hygiene is less of a personal virtue and more of a group project no one's doing. You live here in a house crammed with maybe 15 other people, depending on the week and who's between jobs. Your room is the size of a cupboard with the aspirations. You have just enough space for a bed, a chair, and a basin that leaks. The wallpaper is peeling in slow, mournful curls, and your window looks out onto a brick wall so close you could spit on it. Not that you would. Probably. Communal living in Victorian Britain is a special kind of intimacy. You hear everything, every cough, every creak, every whispered argument and every not-so-whispered flatulence after dinner. And you smell everything. Food, sweat, coal smoke, wet wool, and on bad days, a little bit of death. Hygiene, when so many people are packed into one building with minimal plumbing, becomes more theoretical than practical. You make your way down the hallway toward the shared washroom. It's not really a room, more of a corner with a tap over a chipped basin and a cracked mirror hanging by a single nail. Someone's left a sock draped over the tap, there's hair in the basin. You stare at it, wondering if it's worth rinsing your face today. You do it anyway, because the alternative is worse. Here's your historical fact: boarding houses were an incredibly common way to live for working class Victorians. Cities were overcrowded and rents were high. So you rented a room, often just a bed, and shared everything else. Wash basins, chamber pots, cooking fires, and even towels. Yes, towels. In some houses, there was one towel hung on a peg for everyone to use. You once saw a man dry his feet with it after washing them in the same basin someone else had just shaved in. You've never used that towel again. You return to your room and change into your least wrinkled clothes. The sleeves are damp from hanging too close to the stove last night, but you don't have the energy to care. You lace your boots, then make your way downstairs where breakfast is being prepared by Mrs. Gaskell, the landlady. She's made porridge, which smells like wallpaper paste and sadness. You take a bowl, add a pinch of salt, and sit near the window where there's a faint draught. Across from you is Mr. Heron, who works as a clerk in some kind of office involving ledgers and long sighs. He smells like musty ink and never quite blinks all the way. Next to him is Bess, who does seamstress work and hasn't spoken since the man she was walking out with disappeared last month. You nod at them both. They nod back. This is as close to affection as it gets in shared housing. The room is full of human presence. Coughs, the scrape of spoons, the occasional thump from upstairs as someone drops something or someone. The walls absorb it all. There's a damp patch in the ceilings above your head that's been growing like a mossy passive-aggressive threat. You asked about it once. Mrs. Gaskell said, "It's always been like that." And that was that. After breakfast, the real fun begins, the daily hygiene shuffle. There's one privy for the whole house out in the backyard. It's a wooden seat over a pit air, and the smell is historic. If you want to use it in the morning, you either have to queue up before sunrise or wait until the house empties out for work. You choose the latter today, pacing your room like a prisoner until the hallway quiets. When you finally get your turn, the door doesn't lock properly, and the seat is always damp. You hover. You try not to breathe. You question your life choices. And here's your fringe fact. Some boarding houses charged extra for hot water, especially for baths. You'd think this would mean people avoided bathing altogether, and you'd be right. Instead, most do sponge baths in their rooms, leaving a trail of damp laundry, half-used soap slivers, and washcloths that could be used as evidence in a crime. If you're lucky, you might be allowed to fill the tub once a week. If not, it's vinegar wipes and wishful thinking. The real issue is feet. Everyone's feet stink. The boots never fully dry, socks are worn until they stand on their own, and the entire boarding house hums with the faint undertone of warm fermented shoe. You've taken to sprinkling baking soda in your boots and pretending it helps. It doesn't. There's scholarly debate about how bad boarding houses really were. Some historians argue they were essential havens, offering shelter and community to the working class. Others describe them as pest-ridden, disease-spreading pressure cookers of human suffering. You don't need a dissertation to know which is true. You just need to live here for a week and try to find a towel that isn't already damp from someone else's back. You spend the rest of the day working, and when you return, the cycle continues. You climb the stairs past the landlord's cat, who smells better than most tenants. You open your door and are hit with the familiar scent of yourself. You light a candle to mask it. You wipe your face, hang your socks, and collapse into bed, knowing full well that someone will knock on your door at some awful hour to ask if you've seen their chamber pot. That night, as you lie awake listening to someone snoring 2 floors down, you think about how much of your life is spent just managing your own stink. Not eliminating it, not escaping it, just containing it, camouflaging it, and hoping it doesn't offend anyone important. Cleanliness in a boarding house is a myth you maintain with vinegar and lies, but sometimes if the fog is thick enough, even the smell can't find you. It's a chill morning, damp and foggy in that way London seems to specialise in, where everything, including your bones, feels slightly wet. You're standing in your boarding house room buttoning your shirt with numb fingers, thinking about the day ahead. You've got a job interview, which in your case means a chance to move from barely scraping by to scraping slightly less. You run a damp comb through your hair, pull on your cleanest pair of trousers, clean being entirely subjective at this point, and prepare to meet your potential employer. You're nervous, you're underfed, and worst of all, you're not entirely sure if you smell like you, or if the lingering aroma of communal soap and chamber pots is clinging to you like guilt. Still, you do your best. You dab on a bit of cologne, rosewater and vinegar, your signature blend, and say a quick prayer that you make it through the day without being sneezed on by a stranger or knocked into a puddle of something unspeakable. You've barely stepped outside when it happens. A coach rushes by, splashing street sludge up your leg, and you suddenly remember what area you're in. The real concern isn't your appearance. It's not even your general aroma. It's the fact that if you get sick, and you might considering half the city is coughing into the fog, the people who are supposed to help you might not even wash their hands first. Yes, today we're talking about one of the more horrifying truths of Victorian hygiene. Many doctors didn't believe in germs. Or more specifically, they didn't believe germs mattered. And in some of the more horrifying cases, they didn't believe in washing their hands at all before cutting you open. You arrive at your interview on time, thank heavens, and manage to get through it without sneezing or bleeding on anyone. You're offered a trial shift starting next week, and though the pay is low and the hours grim, it's something. You step back into the street feeling cautiously optimistic, and decide to stop by your cousin Clara's place. She's been laid up with a fever for days now, and her landlady is worried she's come down with something tragic. You find Clara curled on a narrow mattress in a room barely big enough for the bed. She's pale, sweaty, and shivering under 3 wool blankets. There's a strong smell of boiled onions and something slightly sweet. Fermented, maybe? The windows are shut. The chamber pot is full. You gently dab her forehead with a cloth and think, she needs a doctor. The landlady, already nervous about being held responsible for a dead tenant, has summoned one. You hear his boots on the stairs, sharp, deliberate, and a moment later, a tall man in a dark coat steps in, carrying a leather bag and radiating the bored air of someone who's seen too much and doesn't care about any of it. He doesn't wash his hands. You watch, horrified, as he examines Clara with bare fingers. He opens her mouth, checks her pulse, pulls back her eyelid, all with the same hands he probably used to tie his boots, eat his lunch, or examine the previous patient, who may or may not have died of something contagious and phlegm-based. He doesn't flinch, doesn't even reach for a rag, just wipes his hand on his coat and begins scribbling notes. Here's your historical fact. Hand washing was not widely practiced by the doctors in the early Victorian era. In fact, many thought the very idea was laughable. The theory that disease was spread by invisible particles, germs, was still controversial. Most medical professionals followed the miasma theory, which blamed disease on bad air and foul smells, not on contaminated hands or instruments. This meant a surgeon could go straight from dissecting a cadaver to delivering a baby with nothing more than a wipe on his apron in between. You've read about Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician who in the 1840s dared to suggest that doctors should wash their hands before assisting with childbirth. Mortality rates dropped dramatically in his ward, but instead of being hailed as a hero, he was ridiculed. Colleagues accused him of blaming doctors for infections. He died in an asylum, and hand-washing still didn't become common practice for decades. It's the fringe fact that really haunts you. In some hospitals, especially maternity wards, women would beg to be treated by the midwives rather than doctors, because the midwives washed their hands. The doctors, proud and proper, considered hygiene beneath them. They saw blood on their coats as a badge of honour, not a red flag. You once heard someone call it the surgeon's proud patina. You gagged into your scarf. Clara stirs, murmurs something. The doctor listens for a moment, gives a vague nod, and writes down tonic, rest, fresh air. Then he snaps his bag shut and leaves without so much as a nod in your direction. You hear his boots vanish down the stairs. You remain seated by Clara's bedside, deeply aware of how many people like her don't make it through illnesses that today could be treated with clean sheets, hot broth, and antibiotics. There's still debate among scholars about how quickly germ theory caught on after the mid-century. Some argue that by the 1860s, the medical profession began to shift. Others point to ongoing hospital infection rates and argue that resistance to cleanliness lasted well into the late 19th century. You don't need a university degree to know that the doctor who just touched your cousin did not believe his hands could hurt her. You boil a pot of water, let it cool a bit, and start wiping down the surfaces Clara's been coughing on. It's not a miracle, it's not medicine, but it's something. You swap her pillowcase with one of your own and air out the blankets by the window. You bring her a cup of warm tea, and when she wakes again, her face looks a little less grey. That night you sit by the hearth, washing your own hands in the basin with soap that smells like beef and desperation. You scrub under your fingernails. You rinse twice. You think about how much of life in this world is held together by guesswork, stubbornness, and this occasional good habit. Doctors might not believe in germs yet, but you do, and you plan to stay alive long enough to prove them wrong. You're standing outside a barbershop staring at the iconic red and white pole spinning gently in the breeze, thinking about your head and how it's starting to itch again. It's been a few weeks since your last cut, and your hair has developed the unruly fluff of a man who's been sleeping with his face in the hearth. You're due for a trim, maybe a shave, maybe something else, though you try not to think about it. You push open the door and step into the warm, smoky air of the shop, where the scent of lather, leather and old blood mingles in unsettling harmony. The shop is narrow, with wooden chairs lining one wall and a few well-worn shaving stations along the other. A man in a striped apron nods at you, his arms already shiny with soap and perspiration. He gestures to a chair that's been wiped down with what could be a rag, or could be a sacrificial towel from the Crimean War. You sit because there's no backing out now. Welcome to the Victorian barbershop where grooming ends and minor surgery begins. Yes, this is not just a place to get your beard trimmed. It's a place where you can also have a tooth yanked, a boil lanced, or your blood let, depending on your mood. Because in Victorian England, barbers are more than barbers. They're barber surgeons, and that red and white pole outside, it's not just decoration. The red stands for blood, the white for bandages, and the pole itself for the stick you'd grip during a bloodletting session so you wouldn't pass out. Charming, isn't it? Your barber sharpens his razor on a strop hanging from the wall. The shrp, shrp sound is both soothing and threatening, like a lullaby sung by someone with a knife. He smiles and asks if you want just a shave, or if you're feeling any pressure in the head. You assure him that it's a grooming visit. It is not a cranial crisis. But he keeps the lancet on the tray anyway, just in case. He begins with hot towels, pressing one against your face until the steam seeps into your skin, softening both beard and dignity. Then comes the lather, thick and cold, applied with a badger hair brush that's seen 1,000 chins before yours. You flinch as he tilts your head back, and then the razor begins its careful journey across your jawline. Now here's your historical fact. Victorian barbershops were often centres of both hygiene and rudimentary healthcare, especially for the working class who couldn't afford a visit to a physician. Minor procedures, like abscess drainage, bloodletting, tooth extraction, and stitching, were all fair game here. It was cheap, quick, and absolutely not sterile. Razors were rinsed, maybe wiped, rarely disinfected. If you didn't die from infection, you were considered to have had a successful visit. You once saw a man get a boil lanced in the chair next to you. The barber wrapped a cloth around his head, nicked it open with a blade, and caught the pus in a little ceramic dish like it was Sunday gravy. You thought about that every time you sat down here, and today's no exception. After the shave, the barber dabs your face with a rag soaked in alcohol and something vaguely floral, maybe rosewater, maybe old gin. Your skin burns. You nod politely, trying to ignore the way his thumb brushes the healing nick on your cheek. Then as you reach into your pocket to pay, you feel it. That tight, pressurized sting on the back of your neck. The one you've been ignoring for days. The one that's probably just a bite. Or maybe a spider. Or maybe, please no, a boil. He sees you pause and leans in. "That spot bothering you?" he asks. You nod. Before you can protest, he's already reaching for a scalpel. Won't take but a moment. And now it's too late. He preps the area with a cloth that's only a little damp, then steadies your head with one hand and makes a quick, decisive slice with the other. It's not deep, but the pressure releases immediately, followed by the unmistakable warmth of, well, you don't look. He wipes, he presses, he murmurs something about clean flow. You're gripping the chair so hard your knuckles are white. Here's your fringe fact. Barber surgeons were still fairly common in rural and working class areas well into the late 19th century, even as professional medicine was becoming more formalised. It was convenience more than anything. Why pay 5 shillings to sit in a cold, judgmental doctor's office when you could pop into your local barber for a trim and a little drainage? In fact, many people preferred their barbers. They were friendlier, faster, and didn't ask as many questions. Of course, there's some debate about how much harm this caused. Some historians argue that barbers actually provided essential care to people who otherwise would have gone untreated. Others point out the obvious: shared razors, dirty cloths, zero sterilisation, and claim the barbershop likely caused more infections than it cured. The truth? Somewhere in between. It was a gamble, but then again, everything was. You press a coin into the barber's palm, still woozy from the mini-surgery. He smiles and hands you a mirror. Your face is smooth. Your neck is oozing slightly, your hair looks acceptable. You thank him and step out into the street, blinking in the grey daylight, feeling a bit like a prize turkey who just narrowly avoided the axe. On the walk home, you think about how weird it is that cleanliness and danger live so close together in this world. A shave might leave you fresh-faced or infected. A haircut could be a health hazard, and yet you'll be back next month. Because what's the alternative? Letting your hair grow all wild, your beard knot into your scarf, your neck boil into a second head? No thanks. You arrive home, change your collar because appearances still matter, and sit by the fire with a towel tucked into your shirt, gently blotting the spot on your neck. You apply vinegar because it's all you've got. You think about Semmelweis again, and hand washing, and whether the blade that touched your skin had seen blood earlier today, probably. But for now, you're clean-shaven, mostly upright, and only slightly leaking. By Victorian standards, that's a win. You've started to notice something strange in your neighbourhood. Not something you can see, necessarily, but something you can smell. It's not sewage, not quite, not rot, not exactly. It's more like menthol and onions, maybe pepper. It clings to your nose, makes your eyes water a little, and seems to be wafting from that house at the end of the lane, the one where old Mrs. Delaney lives, who swears she hasn't been sick a day in her life since she began sniffing ammonia every morning. Yes, welcome to the world of quack cures and clean living, where half the population is terrified of germs and the other half doesn't believe in them. But everyone is selling something to keep your humours in balance and your bodily miasmas from betraying you. You pass by Mrs. Delaney's stoop and give her a polite nod. She's perched in her usual spot, wrapped in a blanket, sipping something thick and green from a chipped teacup. Mint and treacle, she says, waving it at you like a prize. Cleans the innards, wards off plague. You're not even sure which plague she means, but frankly, it's not worth arguing. Back in your room, you pull off your coat and collapse into your chair. Your shoulders ache, your knees feel like boiled cabbage, and your throat's been scratchy for days. You don't have the energy to see a doctor, and you certainly can't afford one, especially not the sort who still thinks hand-washing is a waste of time. So, like most people in your position, you're left to choose from an ever-growing smorgasbord of potions, powders, elixirs, salves, ointments, pills, and drops, all promising the same vague miracle: purity. You open the drawer by your bedside and take stock of your own collection. There's a small bottle of Dr. Whittaker's Vital Drops, which smells like camphor and fermented shoes. There's a half-used tin of reviving pastilles, promising to cure faintness, melancholy, and general weakness. There's a brown paper envelope labelled for constipation and other sins. You don't remember buying that one, but it's probably safe. Probably. Here's your historical fact. Victorian Britain was drowning in patent medicines. These were over-the-counter, unregulated concoctions sold with bold claims and even bolder side effects. Many contained alcohol, opium, chloroform, or mercury. The labels didn't always say so. You might take a tonic for female complaints and end up pleasantly sedated for 6 hours. Or you might end up bleeding from the gums. It was a fine line. You take a drop of the vital elixir just in case. The burn tells you it's probably mostly gin. It doesn't help your throat, but it does make the room feel slightly warmer. There's a knock at the door. It's your neighbour, Thomas, who smells like liniment and desperation. He's holding a bottle the size of a boot and grinning like a man who's seen the future. Turpentine tonic, he says proudly. New from the apothecary. Meant to cleanse the lungs. You breathe it in over a hot pot. He looks far too enthusiastic about boiling industrial chemicals on his stove. You thank him, take the bottle, and promise to try it later, which means never. Later that afternoon, you visit the local chemist to restock your actual soap, and while you're there, you notice the display at the front counter. Bottles with names like Pennyroyal Spirit, Ether Cleanse, Chlorate of Lime, and antiseptic vapours for the clean home. Each one promises to purify your air, cleanse your blood, restore your skin, or protect your delicate constitution from urban foulness. It's not just personal care either. There are disinfectants meant to be sprinkled in your carpets, candles that allegedly kill airborne illness, and scented vinegars for dabbing on your linens. You once knew a woman who stuffed her pillows with dried thyme and cloves. She still caught typhoid, but her corpse smelled terrific. Here's a fringe fact. Some Victorian households kept a bottle of ammonia open in the corner of the room, believing that its sharp scent could repel diseases. Others doused handkerchiefs with carbolic acid, stuffed orange peels with cloves, or wore little charcoal sachets around their necks. There was even a brief trend where people carried sponges soaked in vinegar inside small decorative lockets called vinaigrettes. Whenever they felt faint or smelled something unpleasant, which was all the time, they'd sniff the sponge like a genteel raccoon huffing chemicals. And all of it came down to one thing, the Victorian obsession with invisible filth. Even before germ theory gained traction, people believed in something, some essence, some vapour, some malevolent air that needed to be cleansed. The rich had the luxury of scented baths, silver-handled atomizers, and opium-laced sleep tonics. The poor had mustered poultices and strong will. There's a growing debate among modern historians about how much of this cleanliness culture was based in science versus social anxiety. Some say it was a genuine attempt at hygiene reform in a filthy, crowded society. Others argue it was moral panic, projecting inner guilt onto outer grime. If you're poor, you're dirty. If you're dirty, you're sinful. Therefore, if you buy this bottle of purple soap that smells like lilies and ash, you're redeemed. A clean nose equals a clean soul. Back home, you boil some water and dab a few drops of Thomas's turpentine tonic into the pot just to see. The smell hits you instantly. Sharp, resinous, and vaguely flammable. Your eyes water. Your throat closes a little. You slam the window open and lean out into the alley, gasping. A rat scurries by, and even it seems offended. You dump the pot, light a candle, and collapse on your bed with a vinegar-soaked rag over your eyes. It's hard to tell whether you're cleaner now or just more exhausted. You think about Mrs. Delaney, still sniffing ammonia every morning like it's saving her life. You think about the doctor who wiped his hands on his coat. You think about every little bottle and sachet and lozenge and drop you've ever swallowed in the hope that it would make the air around you just a little less deadly. And you realise something. In a world this filthy, trying is a kind of courage. You cough once, reach for your pastilles, and let the menthol burn your tongue. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But in this world, even a false sense of cleanliness is better than none at all. There's a certain myth that hangs heavy in the damp, coal-scented air of Victorian Britain. A fragrant little lie that the wealthy, the noble, the upper crust of society must have somehow been cleaner than the rest. You think about that sometimes, especially as you trudge through ankle-deep mud and past gentlemen in tailcoats and ladies with parasols perched on their gloved fingers, floating past as if the grime of the world daren't touch them. But you know better. Because you've had a whiff of reality, and tonight we're peeking behind the velvet curtain and stepping into the royal illusion of cleanliness, where even queens wore gowns soaked in sweat and secrets. Let's start with the obvious. Royalty didn't do their own bathing. You knew that already, but the full picture is stranger than you'd think. Baths, even for the wealthy, were rare events. Less about hygiene, more about ritual. Queen Victoria herself wasn't known for her fondness for frequent washing. In fact, she once declared that she found bathing to be overrated and preferred a good sponge and basin to a full dunk. Same, honestly. It's cold, the water smells metallic, and getting entirely wet feels like a commitment, but still, you'd expect more from the richest woman in the world. When Victoria did bathe, it was in a massive, freestanding copper tub, carted in and filled with buckets of heated water by a team of servants. No running taps, no cosy temperature dials. You had to sit and wait as the water cooled, the soap floated, and your royal dignity slowly shriveled like a prune. And you weren't alone. There was always an attendant nearby, because heaven forbid you be naked and unaccompanied. Privacy was for poor people. Rich people had supervision. Now here's your historical fact. Queen Victoria reportedly had a strong distaste for body odour, just not her own. She often complained about the smells of her servants and subjects, but maintained a light, occasional washing schedule herself. Her undergarments were washed regularly, but her dresses, not so much. Heavy gowns made of velvet, brocade and silk weren't designed to be laundered. Instead, they were worn repeatedly, spot-cleaned if they were lucky, and sometimes perfumed to mask the stench. A queen could attend court functions in a dress that had absorbed a week's worth of sweat, powder and royal anxiety, and no one would dare mention the smell. You think of that now as you scrub your one shirt in a freezing basin, fingers numb, shoulders aching, and try not to laugh. The Queen had 10 gowns for every day of the week, and none of them had ever seen a proper rinse. Meanwhile, you're wringing your knuckles raw just to not smell like coal stew. But that's the illusion. Cleanliness in high society wasn't about soap, it was about optics. Take hair, for example. Victorian noblewomen wore elaborate updos, towers of braids and twists and curls that looked like sculptures in motion. What you didn't see was how rarely they washed their actual hair. Once a week? If that. Often their hair was powdered, perfumed and combed, but not fully cleaned. They used dry shampoos, often made of crushed rice flour or starch to absorb oil and mask odour. If lice came knocking, they were treated with vinegar rinses or mercury combs. Mercury. The poison. In your scalp. For cleanliness. And then there's the matter of corsets, which noble women wore tightly for hours, sometimes days, at a time. These were rarely washed. How could they be, with all their whalebone and stitching? Instead, they were aired out, wiped down, or simply layered over fresh chemises and hoped for the best. You try not to imagine the mingling scents of perfume, sweat, and desperation festering in those layers. Or maybe you do imagine it. It makes the chilly vinegar rag you used last night feel almost luxurious. Here's a lovely fringe fact. Queen Elizabeth I, a few centuries earlier, famously claimed to bathe once a month whether she needed it or not. That royal attitude didn't exactly disappear by the time Victoria came along. Cleanliness was symbolic, decorative, something to be associated with appearance, not practice. If your skin glowed and your gloves were white, people assumed you were clean. It didn't matter that you were harbouring a bacterial opera under your petticoats. There's debate among historians as to whether the upper classes were actually cleaner than the poor. Some argue that their access to better fabrics, soaps and servants gave them an advantage. Others suggest that poor people, though with fewer resources, often bathed more out of necessity. They sweated more, worked more, and were less able to hide behind perfume and prestige. You've seen both sides. You've smelled both sides. The conclusion? Money buys a lot, but it does not buy hygiene. You imagine for a moment what it must have been like to be a servant in a grand house, tasked with washing the Queen's linens, brushing out her hairpiece, or scraping the insoles of her slippers after a particularly warm summer's day. You wonder if they whispered jokes about the royal underarms, or if they simply went nose-blind and called it duty. Either way, you're not jealous. You have your own stench to worry about, and at least you don't have to keep it a state secret. That evening, you walk past a dressmaker's shop and pause at the window display. Gowns of stunning detail, lace, satin, pearls and ribbons, all flutter gently behind the glass like museum pieces. You stare at one in particular, imagining it hanging in a grand hall, under chandeliers, brushing against parquet floors and sweating bodies. It's beautiful, it's regal, it's almost certainly unwashed. You smirk, pull your scarf tighter and move on. At home you boil water and give your underthings the old basin scrub. It's not much, but it's something. You hang them to dry by the fire, the scent of lavender soap rising faintly in the air, and you feel a tiny, triumphant satisfaction that Queen Victoria never felt, the simple joy of actually being clean. You lie down with the quiet smugness of a person who washed their shirt and didn't require 5 footmen or a separate tub for it. Outside, the city still grumbles. Inside, you drift off, your sheets crisp, your conscience lighter than your laundry. You're no royal, but you've got standards. You step into the street early the next morning and almost immediately regret it. The fog is thick again and the air is doing that horrible sticky thing, like it's trying to settle on your skin, slip under your collar and make itself at home. It smells like coal-smoked cabbage water and something vaguely urinal. As you pull your scarf higher over your face, you pass a man in a 3-piece suit and shining shoes striding down the road as though the world beneath him were paved in gold, not manure and mud. He doesn't even glance at you. He doesn't have to, because his suit tells everyone who matters that he doesn't stink. Not in the way that matters. You know he probably does. Everyone does. But in Victorian Britain, the real difference in cleanliness wasn't how much you washed. It was whether people thought you were allowed to be clean. And that came down to class. It always comes down to class. You walk past a rows of townhouses with gleaming knockers and clean curtains, where the servants sweep the steps each morning and empty the slop buckets into covered bins. Then you pass alleyways where the air thickens with damp clothes and old soup, where children run barefoot in puddles of dubious origin, and the washing lines crisscross overhead like sad bunting made of underwear and hope. Inside these homes, the narrow shared ones where you and most of your neighbours live, hygiene is a daily struggle. It's water fetched by hand, soap rationed by coin, laundry boiled on rare occasions, and bathing done with a cloth and a bucket. You work 12 hours a day just to afford coal and bread. Washing is a luxury. Clean clothes are for Sundays or funerals, and yet you're judged for it. Here's your historical fact. In Victorian England, cleanliness became a form of moral measurement. Reformers and do-gooders of the time equated dirt with vice. If your child had smudged cheeks, you were neglectful. If your collar was yellow beard, you were lazy. Poverty itself was seen not as a symptom of systemic failure, but as the result of personal weakness, filth being the outward sign of your inner moral decay. The middle and upper classes latched onto this idea with an enthusiasm only rivaled by their fondness for crumpets and passive aggression. They began publishing hygiene manuals for the poor, full of advice like wash weekly even if you're tired, or scrub your doorstep daily to elevate the neighbourhood. Never mind that most working class people didn't have running water, or soap, or even a full day off. You once saw a pamphlet that earnestly recommended cleaning one's undergarments daily with lemon juice and sunshine. You laughed so hard you nearly pulled a muscle. Sunshine? In London? Good one. Meanwhile, upper class families could afford maids to do the scrubbing, nannies to keep the children polished, laundresses to wash and starch everything, and enough clean garments to rotate through the week without ever wearing the same shirt twice. The servants were the ones who stank, and the ones who cleaned it up. Here's your fringe fact. Wealthy Victorians often carried small smelling cases or scent boxes, little decorative tins filled with herbs, perfume-soaked cloths, or even ammonia crystals to guard their sensitive noses against the odour of the lower classes. If they had to ride the omnibus or walk through a poorer part of town, they'd simply pop open their case, press it under their nose, and drift through the human stink cloud like it wasn't their problem. Sometimes they even offered one to a friend as a hint, like saying, "Oh darling, you must try this, it's positively cleansing," when what they meant was, "You smell like the East End." There's a persistent scholarly debate about whether the Victorians actually believed poor people were inherently dirty, or if the narrative was a convenient excuse to reinforce social divides. Either way, the results were the same. Cleanliness became a class weapon. The rich hoarded it, the poor were shamed for lacking it, and both sides clung to their respective illusions. You stop in at a public bathhouse on your way home, one of the newer ones funded by a local church initiative. For a penny you get a lukewarm tub of water, a stiff bar of communal soap, and a sliver of privacy behind a thin door that doesn't quite close. You lower yourself into the tub and immediately feel every muscle in your body sigh. It's not fancy, but it's something. You glance at the man in the next stall over through the gaps in the slats. He's scrubbing his arms like they've wronged him, muttering under his breath. Probably another day labourer. Probably hasn't had a bath in weeks. You nod to him as you step out, toweling off with the cleanest corner you can find. You leave the bathhouse walking a little taller. You don't look rich, not even close, but for the next few hours, you're passing. You're clean. No one will wrinkle their nose when you sit beside them. No one will glance sideways at your collar. And that's worth the penny. But by evening, the illusion fades. The soot is back under your fingernails. The steam from the kettle brings sweat to your brow. You change into your least wrinkled shirt, shake yesterday's trousers, and try to pretend they're fresh. You know someone, probably your landlady, is going to make a comment if she catches a whiff of anything unpleasant. You scrub your face again, splash your neck with rose water if you have any left, and remind yourself that this isn't about being clean. It's about being seen as clean. It's about faking hygiene well enough to be left alone. And in Victorian society, that's more than survival. It's social armour. You lie down in your cot, the fire flickering low, and inhale the faint scent of coal smoke and lavender soap. You made it through another day without being shamed for existing. That's a win. But as you drift off, you can't help but think about the man in the fine coat this morning, striding down the street with not a fleck of mud on him. He might be covered in sweat and hidden smells under all that polish, but no one ever asks. The evening fog curls at your window like a cat with cold paws, pushing its damp breath into the cracks of the room. You sit by the fire, poking the embers with a bit of wire you picked up from the street, and let the smoke sting your eyes while your thoughts wander. Something feels different. The air has a shift to it. Not cleaner exactly, but less hopeless. It's subtle, but you've started to notice the signs. People are talking about hygiene differently now. Not just in whispered complaints about smells, but in new ideas. Scientific ones, hopeful ones. You lean back and rub your hands together. They still smell faintly of carbolic soap. Harsh, acidic, but cleaner than anything else you've used. It's new and it's strange, but people are starting to trust it. You first saw it in the hospital where a friend was recovering from a leg wound. A nurse told you, quite proudly, that everything in the ward had been scrubbed with the stuff. Stops infection, she said. Kills what's in the air. She even wore gloves. Gloves, for heaven's sake. You were so startled you nearly dropped your tea. Here's your historical fact. By the late 19th century, the tide finally began to turn. Thanks to the work of scientists like Louis Pasteur, who promoted germ theory, and Joseph Lister, who pioneered antiseptic surgery using carbolic acid, the medical world, and eventually the wider public, started to understand that invisible pathogens, not bad air or laziness, were behind many deadly diseases. It wasn't about moral failure, it was about germs, and those could be fought. Not everyone believed it right away. Some doctors still sneered at the idea. Some clung to their blood-stained aprons and muttered about superstition. But others, especially younger surgeons and the growing class of nurses, embraced the change. They began sterilising tools, washing hands, ventilating wards, not perfectly of course. But it was a beginning. And it wasn't just hospitals. Public health reformers were gaining ground too. The miasma theory had led to massive efforts to clear foul-smelling areas, but now germ theory gave those efforts sharper focus. New sewers were built, thanks in part to the Great Stink. Yes, still iconic. Water supplies were filtered. Legislation began creeping in to force cities and landlords to provide actual sanitation, not just the illusion of it. You walk to the window and peer down into the street. A sanitation worker is spraying the gutter with lime water from a brass cart. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. And there's talk of building new public lavatories, clean ones with actual plumbing. The newspapers even praised the idea. You try not to get your hopes up too high, but you can't help it. For once, something might be getting better. But what really surprises you is that even in your own boarding house, you've noticed a shift. Mrs. Gaskell, the landlady who once thought vinegar was a complete hygiene regimen, now insists on a weekly scrub of the hallway floor with hot water and carbolic. Someone donated proper soap for the shared washroom. A nurse lives on the top floor now, and she's slowly convincing everyone to stop using the same towel. It's still damp and full of lint, but at least there's more than one now. Here's a fringe fact. Tods? Around this time, ads for soap and hygiene products exploded, especially targeted at middle-class women. Magazines printed breathless praise for new soaps that killed germs, deodorized the body, and even uplifted the soul. Some of the claims were completely absurd. Soap that cured melancholy, toothpaste that guaranteed marital harmony. But others were backed by this new thing called science. Slowly, carefully, the idea began to take hold that health and cleanliness were not just about appearances, but about protection. Of course, there were strings attached. Much of the messaging was still wrapped in classism and fear. The poor were warned that unclean habits would spread disease. Mothers were told that if their children got sick, it was their fault for not scrubbing hard enough. Hygiene was still treated as a moral duty, especially for women who were expected to maintain the health of their families, their homes, and even their street reputations through mops, basins, and elbow grease. But still, there was progress. There's scholarly debate about just how deep this change went. Some argue it was more surface level than transformative, a marketing campaign wrapped in soap suds. Others see it as the foundation for modern public health, the birth of hygiene as we now understand it. Not just a personal matter, but a societal responsibility. The truth, as always, is messy, like your laundry, like your life. You sit back down and pick up a little book your neighbour lent you, The Housewife's Guide to Sanitary Living. It's part housekeeping manual, part guilt trip, and part scientific treatise. It includes instructions on everything from cleaning a sink to identifying tainted milk. The language is stiff, the advice is sometimes absurd, but it's useful. You underline a sentence about boiling water before drinking it. You think about doing just that later tonight. You light a candle and stretch your legs, feeling the stiffness of a long day working at the print shop. Your fingernails are black with ink. You wash them again, just for the ritual of it. And as the water runs grey in the basin, you feel strangely hopeful. Not because things are clean, not yet, but because people are finally admitting they were never clean to begin with. That maybe the problem wasn't the poor or the air or the foreigners or the fog, but bacteria. Invisible, boring, science-backed bacteria. It's not glamorous, it doesn't make for heroic stories, but it makes sense. And in this city of rot and pride, sense is revolutionary. You climb into bed, pulling the blanket tight. The chamber pot has been emptied. The windows cracked just enough to let in air without a draft. You press your head to the pillow and think, maybe I won't die of something awful in my sleep tonight. It's a start. The sky is pink this morning. Pink in that strange, smog-filtered way that only happens in London, when the sun is trying its best but still has to fight through a soup of coal dust and yesterday's chimney fire. You step outside your boarding house with a basin of washing under your arm, blink against the watery light and notice something. The street isn't quite as foul as it used to be. Don't get carried away. It still smells like horse and pipe smoke and that one fishmonger who never closes his shutters. But there's less muck underfoot. The gutters are clearer. There's even a new water pump at the end of the road, one that doesn't gurgle like it's hiding something. You walk toward it now, passing a trio of schoolchildren skipping along the pavement. One of them is actually holding a handkerchief and the others aren't actively covered in soot. You don't know whether to be impressed or suspicious. Today, we're at the end of the Victorian era, or at least close enough to the edge to see what's coming. This morning you're reflecting on everything that's changed, and what hasn't. Because while you've lived through the filth, the stench, the vinegar washes and weekly baths and shared towels, something has shifted. Hygiene isn't just a punchline anymore. It's becoming modern. You lean over the pump and draw water into your tin basin. It's cold, clean, and doesn't smell like it's going to kill you. That in itself feels like a miracle. You remember the days, not that long ago, when cholera was a whisper on every street corner and nobody believed water could carry death. Now, even the children know to boil it, or at least their mothers do. Here's your historical fact. By the turn of the 20th century, hygiene reforms in Victorian England had dramatically reshaped public health. Clean water systems, sewer expansions, garbage collection, and government oversight all became normalised. The Great Stink had terrified Parliament into action, and germ theory had given reformers the firepower to demand better conditions, not just for the rich, but for everyone. It didn't mean perfection, it didn't mean equality, but it meant progress, and with it came a strange, unprecedented idea. Cleanliness could be universal. That's not to say everything's rosy. It's still a classed system, and the rich still live in fragrant denial, while the poor work 10-hour shifts just to afford a bar of decent soap. But soap is no longer a luxury, it's an expectation. Toothpaste comes in tidy metal tubes. Bathing, at least once a week, has gone from oddity to norm. And public baths? They are expanding. You pause near one now, freshly painted with a sign in gold letters, Municipal Bath and Wash House open daily. There's a poster outside promoting hygiene for health. It reads, "Clean hands, clean hearts," which is both adorable and a bit ominous, but hey, it's something. You think of how far you've come, how far London has come. You remember sharing towels with strangers and washing your socks in grey water. You remember vinegar cloths, boiled under things, and dousing yourself in rosewater to pass as presentable. You remember hearing someone die in the boarding house across the street from a simple infection that today might be cured with a tablet and a nap. And here's your fringe fact. In the final decade of the 1800s, sanitary inspectors became a real job. Armed with clipboards and soapbox enthusiasm, these brave, slightly nosy individuals went from home to home checking for proper ventilation, sewage connections, and general cleanliness. If your home was found lacking, you might get a citation or a pamphlet, or a visit from a health missionary armed with scrub brushes and an alarming smile. There's still debate among scholars about just how effective these reforms were. Some argue that while infrastructure improved, attitudes lagged behind. Others insist the real breakthrough wasn't the sewer pipes or the soap, it was education. Once people understood that disease was preventable, not inevitable, everything began to shift. And for the first time in a long time, cleanliness wasn't just a social performance, it was a survival tactic that worked. You walk back home with your mason, water sloshing gently against the sides. You're not worried about someone bumping into you and splashing it all over your boots, not because people are more careful, but because people are more aware. That water, it matters now. You pass your neighbour Thomas on the steps. He's holding a newspaper and a cup of something hot. He's shaved, his clothes are pressed, and he smells vaguely of eucalyptus and pride. "Did you hear?" he says. "They're talking about building indoor lavatories in the new tenements." You blink. "With plumbing?" "With plumbing," he grins. It hits you then. The idea that a private toilet could exist in a home. Not in a shared backyard, not in a bucket behind a curtain, but in your own space. It feels indulgent, impossible, and entirely real. You spend the rest of the afternoon doing your washing, still by hand, still bent over a basin, but now with carbolic soap and clean water. You hang your shirts near the window and actually smell a breeze that doesn't carry the scent of decay. Your landlady walks by and nods approvingly. "Good wash," she mutters, and that's the Victorian equivalent of a standing ovation. That night, you go to bed with clean sheets and a clean conscience. You light your candle, turn down the blanket and pause for a moment. You think of the long, soapy road it took to get here, the bloodletting barbers, the tooth powder made of crushed bone, the doctors who scoffed at hand-washing, the underpants worn until they were stiff with history. And now, your hands are clean, the floorboards have been scrubbed, and the stink of the city, while never gone, feels a little further away. The war against dirt isn't over, but you've won a few battles, and for now, that's enough. You're still lying in bed, the fire dimmed to its last golden embers, the streets outside quiet now, tucked beneath the soft breath of night. Your room, small as it is, feels different. Not just because the chamber pot's empty or the laundry's drying from a line by the window, but because you feel different. Maybe it's the clean sheets, maybe it's the boiled water sitting ready for tea tomorrow, or maybe it's just the knowledge that things really are shifting inch by inch. The stink of the old world still lingers, sure, but it's fading. Beneath the rise of steam, the scent of soap, the scrub of one determined hand at a time. You close your eyes and let the quiet settle over your chest. You're still here. You've survived the lice, the vinegar wipes, the awkward stares from people who smelled slightly better, or at least pretended to. You've navigated the weekly bath schedules, dodged barbers with bloody razors, and lived to see the miracle of indoor plumbing whispered about like legend. And somewhere in all that, between scrubbing your fingernails and learning the difference between lavender water and turpentine, you became a part of something much bigger than yourself. You helped usher in a new kind of clean. Not the fancy, perfumed, powdered kind that royalty could afford, but the practical, hard-earned, daily kind. The kind of clean that doesn't just look good, it feels good. The kind that says, I care enough to try even when no one's watching. You shift under your blanket, tuck your feet in tight, and smile softly to yourself. The past may have been grimy, sticky, and honestly kind of smelly, but it's behind you now. Tomorrow you'll rise again, light the fire, heat the water, scrub the basin, and carry on the quiet work of being clean in a world that only just started caring. The night hums gently outside. The breeze through the cracked window smells like coal smoke and soap. That's progress.